You don't have to know a person's name to know who they are.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Arey, and this is a complete breakdown of Agatha All Along on Disney+. We are combining all of our Easter eggs to give you a massive omnibus of all the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed from every single episode, including Easter eggs that we missed the first time around. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to go down the Witch's Road. So there is a new Marvel Television intro, which is blessedly shorter than the very long Marvel Studios intro. Notice how it's made to look like an old tube television, which scans lines and pixels, which could be a tribute to WandaVision's iconic end credits. Now, you'll remember that WandaVision ended with Wanda trapping Agatha in the persona of Agnes, the nosy neighbor.
Hiya, hun.
And it seems like, since then, Agatha has been creating different TV scenarios for herself. The first episode begins with her recreating the excellent Kate Winslet series, Mayor of Easttown. Now, Mayor of Easttown follows a detective in a small town who investigates a murder of a young woman who was found in the woods, just like the corpse in this episode. Agatha begins the episode humming a tune, which is actually both the score to the show, and in episode 2, we hear that it's the Ballad of the Witch's Road.
Down the Witch's Road.
So even in her television fugue state, Agatha's mind is drifting towards her old life and the desire to rewalk the Witch's Road. And I want to quickly let you guys know that our Agatha parody merch is only going to be on our merch store for a little bit longer. In about a week, we're going to remove the Witch Brat shirt, the Beast Tarot card, and Get On Losers, We're Flying the Cursed Road. And we also have lots of other fun parody Marvel shirts, like one of my favorites. Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself. Shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel. You can find links to those shirts and some of my other favorites down below in the description. Now, back to the Easter eggs. Now, she's greeted at the crime scene by her neighbor Herb. Now remember, he was Wanda's neighbor in WandaVision, who was first mind controlled by Wanda and then later by Agatha.
She came here because...
So the end of this episode reveals that Agatha has just been walking around talking to people like she's in a crime show, which means that for this whole conversation with Herb, they were actually standing at the fence line in Herb's garden. It's very hilarious when you rewatch this scene knowing this.
When the chief calls and tells me hibernation's over, got a case only you can solve.
What?
Now, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness showed us Wanda being driven insane by the influence of the Darkhold, the evil book of the Chaos God Chthon. Now, in a moment of lucidity, Wanda destroys the Darkhold in every reality, but then Wundagore Mountain fell onto her head. But we saw her Wundagore Shrine in Deadpool and Wolverine in the Void, which raised some doubts about whether or not she is actually gone forever, which Agatha addresses here.
She is dead, though, isn't she, Herb?
Oh, she's really most sincerely dead.
Never know.
Notice that Wanda, the corpse, is wearing the same hoodie she wore in the WandaVision finale. Her fingers are blackened from using the Darkhold, like what we saw happen to Agatha in WandaVision and to Wanda in Multiverse of Madness. She has died from blunt trauma to the head from a book called Dialogue and Rhetoric, Known History of Learning and Debate. And as Agatha later pieces together, the first letters of the title spell out Darkhold, because it was possession of the Darkhold that killed Wanda and the reason she dropped a mountain onto her own head. And our editor Harriet Lengel-Enright pointed out that the author of the book, Andrew Hugo, is actually an anagram for Wundagore, the mountain where Wanda died. So the rules of magic established by the MCU say that when a witch is trapped between runes, only the witch who casts those runes could break their spell. This is why Agatha is still trapped within her own mind. But however, it is possible to break out of a spell once the caster is dead. But it's difficult to do this, as Doctor Strange told Ebony Maw in Infinity War.
You'll find removing a dead man's spell troublesome.
This is why, following Wanda's death, Agatha is able to break free. And here's a little detail that I liked.
But right now, this unidentified woman lying dead in a crick has just got me down in the dump.
Now, crick is a rural way to say creek. So even though Agatha is filling this character with silly cliches, like carrying a coffee cup to a crime scene, Kathryn Hahn chose this character choice that is spot on for this area. The opening theme is the Ballad of the Witch's Road that we also hear in episode 2, the same theme that Agatha was humming to herself. But the opening credits have reimagined the song like the opening credits to a show like The Wire, as singer Matthew Mayfeld reinvents the tune with a gravelly Tom Waits style. The intro also seems to take cues from prestige dramas like True Detective. So the intro features the Welcome to Westview sign that we saw in WandaVision and features the visual of the yellow crime tape leading into the woods.
Down, down, down the road, down the winding road.
So this is reminiscent of the yellow brick road that Dorothy walked to get to Oz. Now this is appropriate since Agatha's journey to the road in episode 2 is very much like the Wizard of Oz. She even calls Joe Locke's character,
This is my familiar Toto.
So this entire intro is essentially a recreation of Mare of Easttown's second episode, where Kate Winslet investigates a murder in a crick. But this is not just a cool Easter egg. Agatha is trying to escape her own mind by taking on the role of an investigator. I also loved this gag that the show is based on the Danish series WandaVision.
There it is! There it is!
Now, Agatha has conjured up sitcom intros before, like when she filled Wanda's head with this incredible earworm.
And I killed Sparky, too.
Then she enters the Westview Library, which you'll remember was the location where the Visions had their final face-off. Now that encounter set up the upcoming series Vision Quest, which I am very excited about because of the involvement of Picard Season 3 showrunner Terry Matalas. Now the librarian is Dottie. You remember her.
Dottie is the key to everything in this town.
Now we thought she might have been Mephisto, but she was just a concerned mom.
My name is Sarah. I have a daughter. She's 8. Maybe she could be friends with your boys.
Agatha learns that the book was stolen 3 years ago, just like how the Darkhold was stolen by Wanda 3 years ago. And then she finds the burned shelf of other copies, because Wanda destroyed the Darkholds in every reality. And I just want to quickly flag that all of this Mare of Easttown fantasy stuff just looks great. I don't know how the fake part of Agatha all along looked better than the entirety of the show's Secret Invasion, but there you have it. And I also want to note something here, that some of the things that Agatha hears in her fantasy are definitely the neighbors talking. But moments like this are Agatha's subconscious telling her the Darkholds have been destroyed. So the police chief was also a background actor in WandaVision, and he tells her,
there were traces of a particular microbial sediment only found in Eastern Europe.
And this is interesting. So Mount Wundagore, where Wanda apparently died, is in Eastern Europe, where Wanda is originally from. But Chief Proctor wouldn't have known that information, which means that Agatha, subconsciously, sensed that Wanda died on Mount Wundagore, and she knows that that moment means that she can now be free from Wanda's spell. Later, we see her almost jarred from her fantasy when she starts to spell out Darkhold. Then Aubrey Plaza's Rio Duvall shows up as an FBI agent, and she's actually known as the Green Witch. Now, this is a new character invented for the MCU, but I think she could be a version of the Emerald Warlock, who is kind of like Wanda's archenemy in the comics. She fights him when she walks the Witch's Road in Scarlet Witch issue 4. Rio emerges as a character in Agatha's fantasy, kind of like how Agatha became a character in Wanda's fantasy. Then Agatha goes to meet Norm. Remember him?
Afternoon, everybody. Oh, no!
Actually, different Norm. And then he tells her about her pendant. Now, Agatha wore this pendant of the Mother, Maiden, and Crone in every episode of WandaVision. As we said at the time, Mother, Maiden, and Crone are seen as the 3 facets of womanhood, which of course they mock in this show.
What, no working professional goddess?
But they also represent the phases of the moon, and this deity is often tied to the source of a witch's power. We see this occurring throughout myth and stories, most notably as the 3 witches in Macbeth. Now, the locket has a bit of hair inside, which emotionally affects Agatha in episode 2. When Rio arrives, Agatha mentions a wreck in Eastview. Now, this could be a subtle nod toward the Wicked Witch of the Westview, Agatha, and the Wicked Witch of the Eastview, Rio, continuing this Wizard of Oz symbolism that we see in the credits. And then Joe Locke's mysterious character breaks into the house. Now, ever since he was cast, there has been speculation that he was playing a grown-up version of Wanda's son, Billy.
But didn't he fade away into space dust?
Yes, but in the comics, something similar happens. Wanda realizes that she conjured up her boys and they were never real. And yet, their essence was preserved and they were reincarnated as superpowered teens. Very long story. The grown-up Billy and Tommy were founding members of the Young Avengers, which I really hope Marvel is still planning on making since they have been seeding this movie or show for years. Now, in the comics and in WandaVision, Billy has powers similar to his mom, but he also takes a long time to realize who he really is. He and other Avengers go off to find Wanda in a great comic called The Children's Crusade, which again, I really hope they adapt in the MCU. So, Billy's interrogation is what finally snaps Agatha out of her stupor. He admits to her that the pictures of the dead body are actually flowers and the two-way mirror is just a painting. But at first, he plays along with this fantasy.
When you say decorated, do you mean suspended without pay?
So something about Billy's presence gradually pulls Agatha from her fantasy. This happens after she notices his black fingertips, but this is actually reminding her of the effects of the Darkhold.
That's why I saved you from the spell you were under.
And this makes me think that one of Wanda's last acts with the Darkhold could have been to save her boys' souls and give them new lives. When she goes to the morgue, she wills Wanda's body into existence, and then she sees a library card for a toe tag, and she makes a point to call Wanda's hair Scarlet, as in
The Scarlet Witch.
When Rio pulls Agatha out of her fantasy, we see her slip between several costumes from WandaVision. The Modern Family version, Malcolm in the Middle with, Juicy written on the butt, and the 80s hair with leg warmers, and finally, to her original black and white design. Now, when she's finally freed, she sees her own name on the Darkhold library card because she had the book out before Wanda. She emerges from the house nude, which is important for a few reasons. One, she is being born again, being born nude just like we all are, and this nudity shows her new freedom. But also, the young women accused of being witches at Salem were said to have been seen dancing naked in the woods. So Agatha regaining her autonomy while nude is showcasing her taking control over her own identity and body. Outside, Herb is working on his garden, just like he did in WandaVision, and he tells Agatha how they all cope with the events of that show.
Wanda.
Ooh, we try not to say her name.
Ugh. Because you're cowards.
And she gets angry with him when he implies that she is the busybody neighbor from the sitcom Fantasy.
Well, you mostly been a good neighbor, a bit too casual with your boundaries.
Call me nosy, I'll cut out your tongue.
Herb tries to give her a purple shirt, her favorite color, and she realizes that Wanda sapped away all of her powers. So now, instead of having a spell dungeon, her basement is just a basement. And then Rio shows up and reveals that Agatha has been hiding behind the Darkhold's magic for years as she traveled the world stealing power from other witches.
Oh yeah, but then she messed around and found out.
That's right, but now the Salem 7, who burned her at the stake in the comics, are coming to collect the bill. But Agatha talks her into a stay of execution.
Don't you want me at my best?
Oh yeah, like in Hook, when Tinkerbell gets Captain Hook to give her 3 days to train Peter Pan into remembering that he is a proper Pan.
Oh my god, it is like Hook. High five! She talks about the fates of various witches, which is how young women accused of witchcraft were murdered in real life. And now, to break down the end credits, here is Brianna McLarty.
Thanks, Ryan. So there is a ton of references in the credits, so let's just go straight into it. So first we see an old-timey newspaper clipping about the Salem witch trials, and there's also this book with several witchy references. At the top, there's an excerpt of the Ballad of the Witch's Road, which they sing in the next episode. And below, there's an excerpt explaining earth magic, which says, "In order to connect to the power of the earth, you must touch your feet to the soil and channel her divine magic through you." Which is why the Coven all remove their shoes when they get on the Witch's Road in the next episode. Then we see a Google search of the Witch's Road, and the second result is Lorna Wu, the rock star we hear about in the next episode.
Lorna Wu. As in Lorna Wu in the Coral Shore.
And then we see an Agatha-styled rendition of the Bewitched title card, which was a 1960s sitcom that was referenced several times in WandaVision. Then we see George H. Walker's witch trial in Salem, Massachusetts, arguably the most famous depiction of the event. The next drawing is actually a political cartoon called State Witches Laying a Spell Over the Country. And get this, each witch represents a key figure in passing the Reform Act of 1832, and this one's even the Queen herself. And then we get another depiction of the Salem witch trials. This one was simply titled The Witch Number 2. Then we see this image, which is from the 1916 sheet music book by J. Delancey. And then finally we move out of illustration into actual film, with the witch from the classic 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Next we see a crow, and in episode 2, Agatha sees a crow and she's like very disturbed by it. Throughout the show there's talk of familiars, so my guess is that a crow is a familiar for one of the Salem 7, the group that's hunting Agatha. And that explains why we get another image of the Salem witch trials. Remember, in WandaVision, it was revealed that the Salem witch trials were carried out by witches themselves. And then we see a picture of Irene Ray, a woman who was accused of witchcraft in 1938, which is way too late for that to be happening. Also behind her, there's a newspaper clipping talking about the hex titled Examining the Anomaly. Next we see a depiction of the Wizard of Oz. See that Dorothy was the Cowardly Lion, but it's overlain with text that says Cotton Mather in witchcraft. Cotton Mathers was a clergyman who helped propagate the hysteria around the Salem witch trials. He's actually one of the most famous figures of the Salem witch trials. Then we see Lisa from The Simpsons dressed up as a witch, which I love. What a cool little pop culture reference. Then we see a witch walking away from the camera. I couldn't find any direct match for this, so I think this might be a new image for the show. And notice how it looks all wonky at the edges, the same way the hex looked when Wanda walked out of it. So this could represent how Agatha is escaping her own personal hex. Next we see this image, which is from a short story magazine called The Black Cat. Then we see a depiction of a zodiac man from a medieval manuscript. A zodiac man is a diagram which depicts which parts of the body connect to each zodiac sign. So this belief was practiced in tandem with medicine. Then we see a scene from the witchy cult classic The Craft. Great watch for for Halloween, highly recommend. There's also reference to Ouija boards. This lettering is the classic Ouija style lettering, and these three girls are actually holding a planchette. Then we see a reference to Wicked with an Elphaba doll and sheet music. And there's a blink and you miss it excerpt from an article about Wanda and the Hex. I think this is the same article we saw earlier. Then we see crystals. Now, crystals are key elements of modern day witchcraft. It's believed each crystal has different properties and frequencies that can be channeled and help with everything from healing to protection. Then we see this headline, "Can you talk to the dead?" followed by a pentagram summoning circle, which burns away to show the hex. So this implies that the hex was basically one giant summoning circle for Vision. Remember, Wanda didn't know she was practicing magic, but she was. Agatha confirmed it. So she intuitively created the summoning circle so she could perform the spell. And then we get a tarot layout. Now, tarot is going to be very important to this show. And I want to thank ScreenCrush's own Elias Kenouryiakis for all of the great tarot catches he made throughout the show. He really helped me break this down. So Lilia mentioned earlier the Three of Pentacles, which represents teamwork and foundational structures. And of course, they'll need teamwork to complete the Witch's Road. And you could even say the hex itself is a foundational structure. But Lilia also referred to Jennifer as the High Priestess, which is a major arcana card. And in this tarot layout, there's 5 cards that surround the magician. This layout makes me think that by the end of the season, each character will represent a tarot card. And then we get this funny image of all of these witches paddleboarding. Now, this is a real thing. You can just go paddleboard dressed up as a witch. There's meetings across America. And of course, the last thing we see along with the title is the fabled Witch's Road, where we're going to spend most of the season. Thanks, Ryan, for letting me break that down, and back to you for episode 2.
Down, down, down the road.
So now let's break down episode 2, Circle Some with Fate to Unlock the Hidden Gate. Now, if you haven't noticed yet, the episode's titles are taken from the song Ballad of the Witch's Road. The first episode was about Agatha breaking out of her stupor to find the gate, and this episode is about the gate to that road being unlocked. Now, the Witch's Road comes from the comic Scarlet Witch issue 4. Just like in the show, it's a plane of existence where only witches and sorcerers can enter. We learn that Agatha is the only witch who walked it to completion, or at least one of the few. And at the end, you get... In Agatha's case, maybe she gained the ability to steal power from other witches. Now, in the comics, the Witch's Road is tied heavily to the multiverse. It exists in another universe where it is ruled by the Scarlet Queen, likely a variant of Wanda Maximoff who is older. This episode has another tie to the multiverse and the excellent Werewolf by Night special that I'll go over a little bit later. So, when he tries to tell Agatha his name, this happens.
Who are you?
My name is...
Again, I would not be shocked if this kid turns out to be Billy Maximoff. It even looks like the letter M is scrolled over his mouth. It's also interesting how Agatha can't hear his name or hear him talk when he describes his past.
I was born
So, 2 things. 1, this implies that he is alive through Wanda's magic, and that Agatha is still being affected by Wanda's spell. To that point, his name being bleeped reminded me of this.
I'm Mr. Steve.
In Kill Bill, Beatrice Kiddo's name was being bleeped only for the audience. The characters in the movie hear her name just fine. So in the case of Agatha all along, this is implying that Agatha and the audience are each spectators of this show. WandaVision was groundbreaking for how it flirted with the fourth wall. Characters were literally watching the show that we were watching. So to walk the Witch's Road, Agatha has to reassemble a coven because, as she says...
No, those harpies are dust.
Her last coven being dust could be alluding to the Salem flashbacks that we saw in WandaVision. In the car, the kid gets a call from his boyfriend, further evidence that he is Billy Maximoff, because in the comics, Billy is gay. In fact, his relationship with Hulkling is the anchor of the Young Avengers books. When Agatha leaves the house, we see the foundation of the house that Vision bought for Wanda, where she started her Westview spell. This is why Agatha gives her a little spit. And guys, I really hope these two characters get to meet up again in the future someday. Now, I really dug this first episode, but the second one felt like, just a lot of chess pieces moving around the board as they go through the motions of getting the band back together. But oh my god, what a band. Broadway legend Patti LuPone plays Lilia, a divination witch. So all the witches from the coven are pulled from deep lore in the comics. Lilia is descended from the very first Baron of Mordo, this guy's ancestor. She grew to be centuries old and part of a witch coven that owned the Book of Cagliostro, the same book that we see in Doctor Strange.
This one's got pages missing.
That's the Book of Cagliostro, study of time.
So she used this book to see the future, which is her gift in the show. Now, I think that when Lilia has these episodes, she is actually seeing the future and communicating with her future self. So it'll be interesting to go back later and re-watch what she says to herself in these moments. When Agatha admonishes her, she says,
"Witches like you are the reason people think we poison apples."
Which calls back to the witch in Snow White, which, as Brianna said, is in the closing credits of the show. She also admits her weakness.
I can't steal your magic.
Unless you blast me with it.
And, as we saw in the Salem flashback, this is how Agatha destroyed her own coven. Lilia gives her a list of 4 names, but the last name is a black heart. Now, later we're meant to think that this is Mrs. Hart, Vision's boss's wife from the first episode of WandaVision.
Stop it.
Then they meet the great Sashir Zameda, who frankly was underused when she was on SNL. She's playing Jennifer Kale, who runs one of those trendy snake oil shops that sells ridiculous items like probiotic candles.
Especially because you do have to burn them before ingestion. It's an FDA thing.
Jennifer Kale also has a complex history in the comics. She learned magic from a book of spells that was taken from Atlantis. This led her to teaming up with the Man-Thing, who we also saw in Werewolf by Night. Now, the Man-Thing is a guardian of the Nexus of all realities, which we kind of saw in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So you can see how there are elements of this story that can lead to the Multiverse Saga and then can be followed up on in Avengers Doomsday or Avengers Secret Wars. And then the final member of the Coven is Alice Wu Gulliver, who is also from the comics. Just like in the show, her mother was a witch. Now, in the show, her mom is a rock star in a band called the Coral Shore, and in the comics, Alice becomes a cop who protects the Coral Shore in Hong Kong. In fact, the Alice in the show was a cop before she was taken off the force. Alice's mom had a huge hit called The Witch's Road, which was in the opening credits of episode 1. It also happens to be an incantation to summon the Witch's Road. Now, as Agatha is gathering her coven, she sees various animals watching her. Now, these are the members of the Salem 7. In the comics, they all have different powers, and some of them do resemble animals. Now, this is one area where I think the show drastically improves on the books. When we do finally see them later, they don't look silly, they are terrifying. Agatha was the twins' babysitter in the comics, and we see this reflected in the mentor relationship they have in this show. Also, I loved seeing this welcome sign he made with a pentagram.
Put it a little more to the other.
So the singing begins, and this entire cast can sing, except I'm not sure about Deborah Jo Rupp.
Am I supposed to know this song?
She is a great comedic actress, and I'm glad they found a way to keep using her after WandaVision. So the lyrics of the song are also episode titles, and I have a feeling that we'll be able to go back and assign meaning to all of the lyrics. For instance, lines like "marching ever forward 'neath the wooded shrine" definitely seem like they're foreshadowing something that happens in a future episode. For instance, they also sing "Gather sisters, fire, water, earth, and air" because each of these witches represents a different element. So I thought this was a kick-ass sequence. Suspenseful, the song is great, and Toto's fear balances it out and adds a really human element.
Is this the road? Because we should really go like right now.
Finally, a door opens on the floor in the shape of a pentagon. Now, pentagons are figures often associated with black magic and witchcraft, but I also want to point out that Wanda's magic manifests as hexagons with 6 sides, which implies that her magic was just a little bit more extra than a typical witch's.
These go to 11.
So then we enter the Witch's Road. Now, roads like this are often associated with fairy tales, cautionary stories where there's always a witch or a wolf waiting at the end of the road. The Wizard of Oz was an extension of this idea. Dorothy is essentially a Dust Bowl Hansel and Gretel that gets lost in the woods and meets a witch. So the title of this episode is Many Tricks and Trials, which, just like the previous 2 episodes, is a line from the Ballad of the Witch's Road. Now, clearly there are literal trials on the road, and we see a road trick later in the episode. But I also think this is referring to the tricks they'll play on each other. For example, Agatha not drinking the wine, or Jennifer's product line containing actual petroleum. Sharon says,
"This is a kidnapping."
And I just want to point out how heartbreaking this is for her character, especially considering the end of the episode. Sharon already survived a kidnapping of her own mind by Wanda, and for her, this is a kidnapping. She never agreed to travel a road that could kill her, so she survived her first kidnapping by a witch, but not her second. As they walk down the road, Agatha says,
That's exactly how I pictured it.
Suits you.
And I don't think that's just a joke because he's goth and the road is dark and gloomy. I think she actually recognizes that he is a powerful witch. Everyone gets up in arms when they realize that he has a sigil hex on him.
Someone's put a sigil on that boy.
But they still don't actually know that he's the one who freed her from Wanda's spell. Rio helped her climb out, sure, but he actually said the counterspell.
What is that?
Agatha says,
Don't look at me. I didn't put that clumsy glamour on him. Sigils are beneath me.
But didn't she use them in WandaVision?
No, in WandaVision she used runes. Now runes are kind of like letters and combined to create spells, like the protection both Agatha and Wanda use. But sigils are more individual. They're usually created by the magic user for a specific purpose, and they're linked to chaos magic. Now, Agatha is a magic scholar. She's learned everything through years of study.
Years of study to achieve even this
Smallest convincing illusion.
We got a great Easter egg from one of our fans, Chris Teresk Show. He noticed that each word in Agatha all along starts with an A, and a pentagram, a symbol often associated with the devil and witchcraft, looks like 3 A's intertwined. That was a great catch. And Ogben Orinetti, a fan on our Discord, caught another Easter egg that we missed. In the first episode when Herb says,
"Oh, she's really most sincerely dead."
This is a line taken directly from The Wizard of Oz.
She's really most sincerely dead.
It's weird that I missed that because that's one of my favorite movies, and I once directed a high school production of that show. It's also a great catch.
So Lilia's pendant shows 2 hands with magic in between them. And it's hard to tell in the show, but in the Rock Love jewelry collab, it's clear there's an eye in between the magic. This could be a reference to her power of divination, a literal second sight, or it could be a reference to Nazar, which is a bead that's used to ward off the evil eye. Alice is also wearing this big orange necklace. And Rock Love also has an Alice necklace, which they describe as bringing the groovy essence of its on-screen inspiration into a wearable retro chic piece. When Alice sees her mom later in the episode, they're clearly in the 1970s, and guess who's wearing the necklace? Lorna Wu. So it's safe to assume that this necklace was passed down from her mom. Jennifer also has a piece of rose quartz attached to her dress. In crystal magic, quartz is an absolute powerhouse of a stone. And rose quartz is used to heal relationships, not just romantically, but platonically as well. These are all witches that hate each other. Or at least hate Agatha. But this rose quartz might be our first sign that this relationship can heal. They can be an actual coven. She also has a vial pendant attached to her waist, which later becomes a necklace. And this is a nod to her potion making skills. And who knows? Maybe she even has a potion inside that's going to become relevant later. Even Sharon is wearing a crystal.
So, this part where Sharon Davis sits in the tar reminded me of one of the most dramatic moments of my childhood. I definitely think that this scene is coded with Artax Stein in the swamp and the Neverending Story. Later on, there's a reference to another classic 80s movie that I'll talk about in just a bit. And then we get the killer, no pun intended, beach house. And when they step forward on the sand, it also reminded us of the scene from The Wizard of Oz when they first step into the field of poppies. The door shows a full moon, which the teen says is
the water phase.
So this foreshadows 2 things in this episode. One, that this is the potions trial. The majority of potions begin with water, but it also foreshadows that the house will flood. It's such a cool detail to add, and I wonder if every trial will have that kind of foreshadowing. Maybe the Coven will begin to realize that the entrance will clue them into what every trial is so they can prepare. Additionally, the moon is deeply intertwined with witchcraft. Moon magic appears across cultures and is the belief that moon phases affect rituals and other magical practices. Typically, the full moon, the phase we see here, is the strongest time for magical users. Agatha always wears a mother, maiden, and crone pin, also known as the 3-moon goddess. Each archetype represents the phase of the moon. The maiden represents the waxing moon, the mother represents the full moon, and the crone represents the waning moon. There's also this little crab pillow on the bench. Now, this could just be keeping up with the beach house theme, but it might also relate to the zodiac sign, Cancer, which is a water sign. After all, they do show a zodiac man in the credits. When they step into the house, they're transformed into stereotypical rich housewives. Just like WandaVision, Agatha is taking from TV show tropes. In this case, it's TV shows like Big Little Lies and Revenge and The Real Housewives that feature rich women in beautiful houses that have a deadly secret. And of course, they drink too much wine. They find the invitation and then Sharon discovers the bottle of wine. Agatha says,
But if we don't follow these obvious breadcrumbs, we can't move forward and we won't get to the big prize.
Which, along with a common saying, is a reference to Hansel and Gretel, foreshadowing their escape at the end of the episode. Jennifer goes with the teen to get a corkscrew and says,
Did you know she traded her own child for the Book of the Damned?
Now, I think this might be a misdirect, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Also, just a reminder that Agatha's son in the comics is Nicholas Scratch, and we even saw his name last episode. Nicholas is a powerful sorcerer himself who led a hidden community of witches called New Salem. And then, oh my god, she said it!
Or an agent of Mephisto.
Wait, who's Mephisto again? It's been a while since I watched our WandaVision videos.
Okay, so Mephisto is the MCU version of the devil, although they make it clear that he's not actually the devil from the Bible, which is totally because they just didn't want to have beef with the church. He takes his name from Mephistopheles, which is a demon in German folklore. In the comics, he's fought Doctor Strange, the Silver Surfer. He even holds Dr. Doom's mom in hell, which set him on his whole path to becoming a villain. He is truly
the most devious bastard in New York City.
He is tied to Wanda's story in the comics because her twin sons at one point were shards of Mephisto's soul. It's a long long, long story. Jennifer also says,
I doubt she'd even recognize her own son if he showed up at her doorstep.
and I think this is a total red herring, but again, more on that in a second.
Communism is just a red herring.
As soon as they drink the wine, a timer starts, and I have no idea if this was intentional or not, but this really reminded me of the first Saw movie. In Saw, two characters wake up in a bathroom and find out that the air is filled with poison. In a game set up by Jigsaw, they only have a set amount of time before they find the antidote before they die. The teen asks about Alice's tattoo, and she says,
In Colorado, my mom was playing Red Rocks.
Now, Red Rocks is a really cool amphitheater outside of Denver. And remember how I said we'd come back to Nicholas Scratch? Well, here we go. So New Salem, the town of witches that Nicholas led, was actually in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Also, notice that the teen says,
Well, it happened to me at 13 too.
So I wonder if Marvel will make magic similar to mutant powers, the powers often present during puberty.
Damn it, who's secretly an X-Man?
Sharon says,
A witch is really just another name for a bad girl.
and this is more than just a joke. This is actually a reference to the women who have been deemed witches throughout history. Oftentimes, these witches were simply women who didn't go along with the status quo. They were the bad girls in their community, so of course, they were labeled as something evil. Also, notice that Lilia says,
Do you see any pointy hats in here? Any green skin? Any brooms? No, sir.
Now this is super ironic because we know from the trailer that we'll see all of those things later in the show. Now, I love the swelling caused by the potion. Of course, this isn't what regular swelling from an allergic reaction looks like. This mimics overdone Botox, a pointed jab at the actresses and reality stars who populate these type of shows. Now, when they realize what the poison is, Agatha tries to run. You know, we barely got to see the true Agatha in WandaVision. Most of the time, she was just plain Agnes. And now I'm so glad this show lets her just be unapologetically awful. She's selfish and conniving and even petulant at times.
You know what? No!
Yeah. I'm so happy they didn't soften her to make her more palatable at this stage. And on that note, Agatha is partially responsible for Sharon's death. During this scene, Lilia says,
We are wasting time.
You have to drink, Agatha.
and Sharon dies because they don't give her the antidote fast enough. There's a reasonable argument that Agatha killed Sharon because her own selfishness forced the group to stall. Now, when the teen takes the drink, Agatha goes,
No!
and I definitely think this is because of the loss of her own son, Nicholas Scratch. And then we get this heartbreaking scene.
Wanda, I'm begging you. Let him breathe.
So this is actually a reenactment of this scene from the first episode of WandaVision.
Stop it.
In her head, Sharon was pleading, but because of Wanda's hex, all we saw was the uncanny laugh. Small detail, the door they entered displayed a full moon, the water phase as the teen said. Behind Jennifer, there are two hanging lights that also look like full moons. And since the moon controls the ocean tides, this foreshadows that the tide will literally be at their doorstep. As Agatha and Lilia look for petroleum, suddenly Lilia says,
Try to save Agatha.
Now, last episode we found out that Lilia can't completely control when she's clairvoyant. So my guess is that she was actually having a clairvoyant episode here, and I bet that she'll even repeat those exact words later on in the season. Behind Alice and the teen, there's a painting of a stork, which is definitely a reference to the 1970s episode of WandaVision, which is especially fitting since Alice is about to have a 70s era flashback. And then they all start to hallucinate. So let's break down these one at a time, starting with Lilia's hallucination. She follows a little girl and then sees the literal embodiment of death over her. And remember, last episode she said,
When I was chased out of every village I passed through for accurately predicting tragedy.
So I bet that comment and this flashback are related. Maybe Lilia tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. And when it came true, they blamed her. Alice, meanwhile, sees her mom, who says,
Your grandmother died today, thousands of miles away, and I could still feel it when it happened.
Now in the comics, Lorna Wu was killed by a demon, so I wonder if, in the show, the demon chased down the whole family. Hell, maybe it's even Mephisto. Now, Jennifer's hallucination is one of the most interesting. First of all, notice how immediately there are water refractions all over the walls. Now, the house is genuinely descending into water, but in the comics, Jennifer has a connection to Atlantis. She is part of the cult of Zarad-Na, who descend from the Atlantean witch that predicted Atlantis' doom. So I wonder if the water effects here are a nod to her comic history. As they brew the potion, Agatha Agatha sees the Darkhold in a crib, and she seems genuinely upset. This doesn't look like a woman who sold out her son callously. Now, when the potion is wrong, it goes green. Bright green is often associated with envy as well as disease. This could symbolize where this coven stands now. They don't trust each other. As a coven, they are sick. But blue is the color of relaxation and peace, so it could symbolize how this coven can heal. After all, they only got the potion right after Agatha showed a somewhat softer side of herself and gave Jennifer a pep talk. So they have to exit through an oven, a classic reference to Hansel and Gretel. And of course, when Elias says,
"That happened to a friend of mine once. She had a lovely house too,"
she's referring to the candy house that the witch used to lure in kids. Another thing I love about this show is that Agatha is forced to act unselfishly for purely practical reasons. They don't try to soften her or make her act out of sudden goodness of her heart. She just has to help so the rogue doesn't kill her. Also, when they go down the slide, it reminded me of this scene from The Goonies. Now notice when they picked up Sharon, she is completely stiff.
But hasn't she been knocked out the whole time?
Actually, no. When they give her the antidote, she briefly wakes up. Now, they were running right up against the clock, so it is possible that they truly were just too late. Now, like I said earlier, I'm not sure we're completely done with Sharon.
Who's Sharon?
But her death really raises the stakes for the show. Marvel's been famously scared to kill people in their most recent projects, and killing off the most innocent and nicest character shows us that the road is not messing around. This also clears up space for Rio Vidal to re-enter the picture. We know from the trailers that she'll end up on the Witch's Road with them as a green witch.
What's up? I'm Rio.
Also, notice the leaves around them are red. Earlier in the episode, before the water trial, they were blue. So I bet in the next episode, we will get a trial related to fire. And then we kick to the credits with the awesome indie sleaze song Off With Your Head by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Is it a little dark to play this right after Sharon died? Yes. But I love it because Sharon, or Mrs. Hart, was sort of like the Queen of Hearts in this, which relates back to Off With Her Head. The title of this episode is If I Can't Reach You, Let My Song Teach You. Now once again, this is a lyric from the Witch's Road Ballad. However, in previous weeks, the lyrics came from the Sacred Chant version. This line is only in the rock version sung by Lorna Wu, Alice's mom. We open on Agatha standing over Sharon's body, looking straight down to the camera. This is a reference to the first episode when Agatha played a cop. This is the same framing that she had as she looked down at Wanda's corpse. Agatha says,
"I didn't think you had it in you."
Yeah, who was she talking to?
So, in the 2016 Scarlet Witch run, at the end of the Witch's Road, she meets the Goddess of Witchcraft. Now, the Goddess of Witchcraft's health and mood directly affects other beings on the road. In the comics, it's demons and monsters that come out of the woods. In the show, it could be that her mood is affecting the trials. Agatha would know because she has walked the road once before. Also, just a little costume detail, Alice is a fire witch, so it's not surprising that she has a fire emblem on the back of her jacket. However, it is ironic given that her mother died in a hotel fire. Later in the episode, they talk about generational curses. Now, we'll discuss the symbolism of that in just a bit, but it's telling that Alice doesn't just bear a scar from the curse. She literally wears a symbol of her trauma on her back. She is unable to put her trauma down. Agatha acts extremely cavalier about Sharon's death.
R.I.P. Mrs. Hart.
Well, shall we?
Now, this isn't just to reinforce that she is a villainous character, it's to highlight how upset she is about the teen's near death later in the episode. Generally, she doesn't care who lives or dies, but the teen is different. I love that they haven't softened Agatha for this show. She is still kind of awful, but they've given her a few soft spots based on her past. It makes her feel more believable, and it makes us root for her in a way that's consistent with her character. Also, when Agatha turns away, she purposely billows her jacket, which is a reference to the cover of The Scarlet Witch #4. As Agatha talks, she waves her hands in the same way she would if she were doing magic. She's used magic for so many years that these movements are literally second nature to her. They are simply integral to the way she moves. It also highlights just how much she used magic prior to losing her powers. None of the other witches do this. They move, normally. Agatha just reached for magic so often that it's now integral to the way she moves. And I love this little fight between Agatha and Jennifer.
The ballad clearly says, with Coven true, glory shall be thine.
No, it doesn't. It's Coven 2.
As silly as it is, it has a lot of meaning. According to the lyrics from the official cast recording, the lyric is Coven true, implying that they will all have to work together and actually become a real coven in order to survive the road.
Yeah, but didn't Agatha say that only she survived the road last time?
She did, but that doesn't mean that she wasn't in a true coven before. It's possible that a true coven is necessary for even one witch to survive. Jennifer says,
We still need a green witch.
We would not have survived the last trial without my expertise.
Now at this point, it's pretty clear that each trial will test one specific witch and their expertise. Since the Green Witch hasn't been tested yet, she's still necessary to the Coven. She can't be taken off the playing field or they will fail the trial and die. It also makes me wonder if the Road may go after people that have already passed their trials, like maybe Jennifer is more at risk than Lilia. The teen places Baby's Breath on top of Sharon's grave.
Hey, where'd you get a baby?
No. Baby's Breath is a flower, although it's interesting that it grows on the Road. It's typically a symbol of purity and innocence, which is very fitting for Sharon. She just wanted to go to a party. She didn't know about the Witch's Road or the danger that she was in. Agatha used her to open the portal, but frankly, she was too innocent to survive the trials. So let's pour some out for Sharon. The teen says,
"People can't be replaced."
Which Agatha replies,
"Can't they?"
So this is a nod to WandaVision. For one, Wanda literally replaced Vision with her mind's version of him. Plus, White Vision will probably replace Vision in the MCU. Agatha also literally replaced Pietro with Ralph Boner. They cast a summoning spell, and I want to give a big shout out to our own intern, Elias. He translated all of the Latin in this episode for us, which was beyond helpful. Their summoning spell translates to, help us, Green Sister, above, inside, within, outside. They all ask different things from her, and I actually think this is a meta reference.
May she be smart and also not super political.
Disney constantly deals with criticism that everything is woke. Anything they do is construed as political. So this feels like kind of a cheeky acknowledgement to that. The second part of the spell translates to person of green to be made. Later, Rio says,
Less a green witch, more
the Green Witch.
Elias pointed out that she may not be a Green Witch after all. Instead, she could be the Green Man, a forest god from Celtic mythology. The Green Man represents the death and rebirth cycle within a year. Now, there are leaked Funko Pops that may reveal Rio's true identity, but I don't want to spoil anything, so when we get there, we'll go back and reference this moment. When Rio's hand pops out of the ground, it's a very clear reference to the original Evil Dead poster. That film was directed by Sam Raimi, as was Multiverse of Madness. And the mangle way her body emerges reminded us of how Wanda crawled out from this mirror. Now, Rio's little skip and whistle is a reference to Dorothy and the gang setting off on the Yellow Brick Road in The Wizard of Oz. This show is filled with Wizard of Oz references, from the opening credits in the first episode, which depicted a yellow strip of crime tape going throughout the woods, to Herb's line here.
Oh, she's really most sincerely dead.
And of course, Agatha was witch-coded as Mrs. Gulch in WandaVision. Now, I think Rio's addition to the Coven will be great for the show. Think about WandaVision. What Wanda did with the Hex was bad, but Agatha made her look better by comparison. She was more sinister and over the top. Throughout this show, Agatha has been the most evil character. She's the most callous and theatrical. But now, she's put in comparison to Rio, and she's going to seem tame by comparison. Also, notice that the leaves are red and orange, which clues the audience into the fact that this is Alice's trial. They're greeted by a moon phase in the door, just like in the last trial, but this time it's the fire phase, to reiterate that this is Alice's trial. Moon phases are also very important to magic. The waxing moon is often associated with growth and witchcraft. In this trial, Alice has to grow in order to pass. She has to let go of the bad feelings associated with the Ballad of the Witch's Road and fully rock out to it. Also, this framing of Alice is magnificent. A+. When they step inside the house, they're all decked out in their best 70s wear. Now, while I think that Coral Shores, the band that Lorna Wu performed with, is based off of Fleetwood Mac, they all represent different fashion styles from the 70s. Jennifer represents the big style that was comprised of long, loose garments. Alice is wearing the most stereotypical 70s look with big bell buttons and round glasses, and Agatha and Rio encompass the glam rock style. Patti LuPone's outfit is actually a reference to her friend and Gypsy co-star Liza Minnelli. On the wall, Lilia sees a ton of different depictions of witches dying. And wow, side note, I really hope this was an addition by The Road and Lorna Wu didn't just have these around her daughter all the time. These depictions include the popular execution method of burning, but it also includes two lesser known punishments for witches. The second panel depicts torture, a reference to the fact that many women confessed to witchcraft while they were being tormented.
Witch! Press her between stones!
And the last panel depicts drowning, which was another very common way to kill witches. In the early United States colonies, they even threw women into rivers, believing that only witches could swim. So if they swam, they were witches and they were stranded there until they drowned. And if they couldn't swim, congrats, they weren't witches, but they died anyways.
I call that a lose-lose-lose!
We saw last episode that Lilia is originally from Europe, a continent that killed the most witches by far. It's very likely that she saw friends, witch and non-witch alike, die, and that's why she is so emotional here. Jennifer discovers these masks. Now, these are Japanese Namahage masks, which are designed to look like Oni, similar to demons. And if you listen closely, you can actually hear a riff of traditional performance music. On another wall, we see Drop Beat Magazine, which is a ripoff of Downbeat Magazine, a music magazine which is still in publication today. We also see a Fleetwood Mac tour poster, so if we weren't sure who Coral Shore was based off of, we know now. Lilia suddenly says,
Alice, don't.
Don't what? Pardon?
And we know she can't control when she sees the future, and I think this is really going to be a Helena in the House of Dragons situation. At the end of the season, everything she said will either be directly repeated or tied to an event in the show. In fact, I think this outburst could be tied to next week's episode, but more on that in a bit. We cut to Agatha in a recording studio overlooking the house, and here you can see the very 70s design elements of a conversation pit.
What's that?
Well, it was an architectural style in the late 60s and 70s where the living room was actually lower than the surrounding area, creating a pit where you talk to your friends.
I just think they're neat.
Agatha says,
Maybe the road is like Switzerland.
a nod to the country that's managed to stay neutral in each world war. Rio says to Agatha,
You get your power, and I get my buddies.
Now, there is a lot of speculation that Rio will end up being the MCU version of Death. Now, if this is true, then she would have to take a certain amount of people a year, either to keep some kind of cosmic balance or because she's working for someone else. Maybe even Mephisto. I also want to point out Agatha's tone here.
Hey, that's my coven you're talking about. I'm not that kind of witch anymore.
Now, this is her lying tone. It could be because she's putting on a show for the other witches, or this could be her plan. And she just telegraphed their conversation to put more suspicion on Rio. Remember, this was her first thought when Sharon died.
Of course the road killed her. More power for the rest of us.
The teen puts the record on and it plays backwards. Now, this is a nod to a phenomenon known as backmasking that caused a moral panic in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Backmasking is a practice where secret messages are hidden in recordings and only audible if you play them backwards. In the 1970s and 80s, parents believed that bands like Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, and AC/DC were backmasking their music to subliminally encourage degeneracy and Satan worship. In this case, there isn't any backmasking, just Lorna's version of the Ballad of the Witch's Road played in reverse. The overhead shot is a reference to the 1977 horror classic Suspiria. Suspiria is an amazing film that follows a new student at a ballet academy that is secretly run by witches. The show also uses filming and editing techniques that were common in the 70s. For example, the noticeable zoom on Lilia and these three panels. The panels in particular were used by the 70s and 80s films of Brian De Palma, most famously in the movie Carrie, which was about a young telekinetic woman whose powers manifested with puberty. You could look at Carrie and read it as a modern interpretation of a witch. Also, I love the use of the metronome as the timer for the trial. Not only is it thematic, but it actually makes the trial scarier. A metronome is just to keep the beat during recording. It doesn't actually let them know how much time they have. Now, when Lilia is attacked, Alice says, which literally translates to drive out this hoop. She created a protection circle, a common tool used by witches and adapted in various media, such as the salt rings that we saw in Supernatural. We get a point of view shot from the curse itself, yet another reference to this clip from The Evil Dead. When Alice picks up the record, we see the rest of the A-side track list. There's Red-Haired Woman, which could be a reference to Wanda. There's also Cinnamon and Sage, which are the two herbs used for protection and cleansing in witchcraft. There's Flick of the Wrist, most likely referring to how witches wield their magic. And there's also Swan Song. Now, the phrase Swan Song is actually a metaphor for one last grand gesture or performance, which is fitting considering how they destroyed the demon. Jennifer says,
Are we talking about a generational curse?
So, generational curses are a real thing in witchcraft, but it's also become a phrase used to describe generational trauma. Generational trauma refers to the unfortunate cycle of children traumatized by their parents reenacting that trauma on their children ad infinitum. The only way to stop it is to break the cycle or break the curse by actually facing that trauma. It's very telling that Alice convinced herself that the curse was all her own fault.
I thought it was me. That it's my fault that everything I touch turns to shit.
Oftentimes, victims of generational trauma didn't realize they were victims. Instead, they think something is inherently wrong with themselves. Now, when the teen is attacked by the curse, he isn't burned like everyone else. Instead, he's literally thrown out of the room. He says,
Got attacked by the curse. Does that mean I'm part of the coven?
But I actually think this means the exact opposite. Not only is he still an outsider on the coven, but the Road doesn't want him there. He's an interloper. Now, this is actually the first time we've seen the Road really try to kill someone, outside of a trial. Now, of course, there was the poison and the fire at the end of this episode, but those were tests that the coven had to overcome. The Road just straight up stabbed the teen. Also, in this tapestry behind Alice, there is another depiction of moon phases. There's also a moon statue above the recording equipment. Now, when Agatha asked what Lorna wanted, Rio says,
"To save her daughter."
And notice the pointed look that Rio gives her. I wonder if Agatha's goal was to save her son. In WandaVision, it's stressed that death can't actually be undone.
We can't reverse death, no matter how sad it makes us.
Maybe she traded her son for the Darkhold, but only because it was the only way to prevent him from dying. Now, Lilia made me laugh so hard.
No, I studied the Zills and a little pan flute.
It's actually accurate though, because the first set of Zills date all the way back to 500 BC. Like I said earlier, I think Lilia is actually the oldest witch here, so of course, she is the best at the oldest instrument. Now, when the curse hits Agatha, it forces her into the quintessential 70s rock singer pose. Now, this scene is a parody of jam sessions seen in music biopics like Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, when the fire erupts, it first sparks on the tapestries of the dying witches, mimicking how many witches were burned at the stake. Hearing this song performed, it's clear that this is almost a goodbye song from Lorna to her daughter.
If I can't hold you, remember what I told you.
Next, we see the Demon, which is another reference to Suspiria, but this time it's a reference to the 2018 remake. Suspiria is a rare case in which both the original and the remake are phenomenal. The 1970s version relies more on atmosphere and the fear of things that are unseen, but the 2018 version is very in your face, and we get an up-close look at the Demon the ballerinas are battling. And I also love this crash zoom on the Demon, which fits in perfectly with the 1970s aesthetic. It's also very telling that Alice says,
I can see it. I can kill it.
Now, the Demon represents trauma, so by facing her trauma, she can actually overcome it. One of the last lines Alice sings is, Now, in the comics, Wanda finds her mom, Natalia Maximoff, at the end of the road.
Yeah, but isn't Lorna already off the road?
Okay, so the road is a little confusing. It exists outside of space and time. So Wanda actually meets her mom before she was ever pregnant. She meets the version of Natalia that walked the road decades earlier. So we could see something similar with Lorna. The Demon bursting into flames on Alice's shoulders is similar to the metal aesthetics and visuals that became increasingly common in the 1980s. Additionally, the studio catching fire actually looks like pyrotechnics for their jam session. And then they find out that the teen was stabbed. Now, Rio is literally looking at him like a vulture, and Agatha says,
Don't.
Agatha's the only one who knows that Rio is literally dead, so she's making sure that she doesn't take him. To heal the teen, Jennifer needs moonlight and water. Now, earlier in the season, Lilia calls Jen the High Priestess, and on the High Priestess tarot card, there's a crescent moon and water. Another great catch from our intern Elias. And this also really highlights Jennifer's power. She literally fixed a stab wound with 2 abundant ingredients. When they're sitting around the fire, Jennifer says,
I'm an 11th generation root worker and midwife.
Which fits in with her tarot counterpart. The High Priestess represents the divine feminine, and Jennifer uses her power to aid a mother's creation of life. Then she says,
so much for do no harm.
Now, this is a dual reference. On one hand, she's talking about the male doctor who hurt her, but it's also a reference to her own lawsuit where her products burned over 800 people. Jen tells Alice to put a mixture on her pressure points.
Because it smells nice.
Thanks, Jen.
Now, that's clearly tongue-in-cheek, but aromatherapy is a large component in witchcraft and alternative medicine. Lilia says,
You know the worst part of being a witch? All the misconceptions and rumor mongering.
And notice that now the leaves on the road are pink. In previous episodes, the leaves reflected the upcoming trials. From the trailers, we know that Lilia is forced into a literal good witch costume that is pink. We cut back to the teen and Agatha. Now, after saying she didn't put the sigil on him, she says,
Actually, I wouldn't know.
Also, the teen's always worn a hoodie, so we didn't see these moons on his sweater until now. These are the waxing and waning phases of the moon. The teen is literally centered between these 2 phases, meaning that he could represent the full moon. Now, the full moon is when moon magic is at its strongest, so this could hint at how powerful of a magic user he'll become. Back at the fire, Lilia says,
Vampire bite. Right before I knocked out his other 2.
Please, 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 please let this be a Blade reference. Agatha shows them a scar from the Daughters of Liberty. Now, the Daughters of Liberty was a real association of women in colonial America, and in Marvel Comics, they were protectors of peace and freedom trained by Agatha. Now, they were an underground group, so this quip by Agatha,
You ever hear of the Daughters of Liberty?
No.
Exactly.
may be a farce. She could have gotten that scar training them and pretending that it's an actual battle scar. Also, I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say that in the comics, a modern-day version of the group is formed after some political upheaval. Rio says,
A long time ago, I loved someone.
and I had to do something that I did not want to do.
Supporting the popular theory that she is Death, and she also says,
even though it was my job.
Now, if Rio is Death, it'll be interesting to see how the MCU plays with her characterization. I mean, is Death inherently evil, or is it just a natural part of life that gets a bad rep, like witches? Rio says that she loves her and that it was painful to hurt her. Now here, she has a chance to get her back. All she had to do was to let Agatha keep believing the teen might be her kid, but instead, she stops her before she kisses her to tell her the truth.
That boy isn't yours.
Knowing that it will stop their chances at rekindling. That doesn't seem evil to me. This week's episode is titled Darkest Hour, Wake Thy Power, which is another line from the Ballad of the Witch's Road. And this title actually reveals the plot of this episode. This was the teen's darkest hour. He no longer had any rose-colored glasses about the witches around him. He was angry, and that finally allowed him to unlock his powers as Wiccan.
Wait, Wiccan?
Yes, Wiccan. And we're going to talk about that reveal a little bit later in the video. We are so excited. From the hole where Rio emerged, the Salem Seven enter in their animal forms. Now, these forms have their roots in the comics, but they're also symbolic. In the comics, the Salem Seven are pretty silly. They're basically mutated witches, and they don't exactly strike fear into people's hearts. A lot of them also have their powers based off the characters in the comic, and the comics are based from animals and correspond with some of the animals that we see here. First, we see a fox. Now, this animal doesn't have a comic counterpart, but symbolically, foxes represent cunning, resilience, and mischief. Keeping that in mind, I think that it's important that she entered first. The Salem Seven haven't managed to get to Agatha through brute force, so maybe they can get to her through trickery, and this member entering first could symbolize that she'll be the first to ensnare her. Next, we do see a crow, who we talked about in episode 1. Crows are often linked with death because they are scavengers. After that, there's a snake. So in the comics, there's a member of the Salem Seven named Reptilia, who literally was a half snake. Symbolically, snakes symbolize evil and deceit, ever since Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, I love what they've done with the witches movement. Because they all turn into animals, they move in animalistic ways, which makes them super creepy. But it also highlights how they're different from other witches, keeping in line with their comic counterpart. In the comics, even though all of the Salem Seven could wield magic, their most frightening trait was their physical appearance. Elsewhere on the road, Lilia says,
The summoning spell. We left the door open.
As we say later, this is a classic trope in occult horror movies. If you don't close the door after spells or talking to the dead, you better believe that something's going to be coming through that door. And shout out to our intern Elias for catching this. The stone they picked up is obsidian, which is often used at entrances to ensure safe passage. This stone is what actually kept the door open. So Lily explains that
When Agatha murdered her sister witches, she spared their young children.
Now this is changed from the comics. In the comics, the Salem Seven are actually Agatha's grandchildren, all fathered by Nicholas Scratch. Also, notice that Rio described them as
a feral, hive-minded coven bent on revenge.
Which is fitting because they crawl out of the ground like animals and also literally have a hive mind with the bee lady. When they're running from the Salem Seven, you can actually tell which member is taunting them. We hear a howl, which means either the member named Fox or Coyote was in front of them. From behind, there's a screech, which we can assume is the owl or the crow. To get away, they create flying broomsticks.
But person, how can Agatha create a broomstick?
Okay, so Agatha no longer has the woo-woo magic, but she is still a witch. Earlier in the season, the teen pointed out the difference between the typical Scarlet Witch style magic and actual spells.
Labor-intensive, manual act of magic.
So Agatha can still do these labor-intensive spells. It's how she did the summoning spell for Rio. She just doesn't have that flashy magic anymore. And Jennifer is actually the same way because she is bound. She can still create magical potions and participate in spells, but she can't shoot magic from her hands. So brooms can only fly if there's at least 2 people to perform the spell.
I get one?
If you give me one back, yeah.
And it's super important that Alice is the one who taps the teen in. It not only symbolizes how he's becoming part of the coven, but also that he takes her place since she dies at the end of the episode. And then we see a member of the Salem Seven as an owl. Now traditionally, owls are bad omens. In Jewish folklore, owls are associated with Lilith, a primordial demon. Also, I love that Alice has fire powers, but instead, she just hit her upside the head.
If I went to Hogwarts, I would use physical violence.
Now when the teen says,
Oh God, oh God, oh God.
Lilia replies,
Try praying to the Divine Mother, kiddo!
Who's that?
So, the Divine Mother is the feminine side of the universe's creation. In some religions, she's an entirely different god, and in others, she's actually part of God. And when I say God, I don't necessarily mean a Christian God, but rather just the being that created the universe. Now, this shot of them flying across the blood moon is a clear reference to E.T., which is fitting. It's not just an Easter egg, but it is fitting because that famous scene in E.T. is also coming on the heels of an escape. But also, E.T. is a movie that is about making connections that create resurrection. E.T. dies in that film and is brought back to life through his connection with Elliot. Now, this episode is centered in death. They communicate with death on the Ouija board, Alice dies, the other members of the Coven get drowned. Now, as they're forced back down to Earth, Rio lets out a stereotypical witch cackle. A reference, of course, to the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. Ooh, God, still gets me. Now, they also run into this witch with bugs crawling out of her. Now, this is clearly a reference to the great 1990s horror movie Candyman.
Not the beast!
She is also the only member of the Salem 7 given an actual name in the credits, Vertigo. Now, in the comics, Vertigo messes with equilibrium, so I don't think the road forced them down, I think it was Vertigo's abilities. So they run into the next house, a literal cabin in the woods. So this is a super common trope in horror movies. The most famous example is Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, which were directed by Sam Raimi, who also directed Multiverse of Madness. Now, there are many cool Easter eggs for this trial. First of all, their accessories were folded into their costuming in really cool ways. For example, Jennifer's pendant is actually embroidered onto her sweater. Alice's necklace is actually in her hair tie, and Rio's knife is now a box cutter. There's also this window with all the moon phases, just like all of the moon phases on the front door in earlier episodes. Jennifer also has a crescent moon embroidered onto her sweater, and Agatha is represented by the blood moon. Now, this small embroidery highlights how different they are and why she attacks her later in the episode. So over the door, there's two sports flags, one that reads Westview and another that reads Eastview, the town that was referenced in episode 1 here.
A car wreck about an hour before time of death.
Where?
Eastview.
Now, Agatha's jersey says 3, which might be a reference to this line earlier in the season.
Within any 3-mile radius, there will be a collection of witchy enough people to form a coven.
But I think it's more likely a reference to the Mother Maiden Crone, who appeared on the pendant that she wore all through WandaVision, which contains that mysterious lock of hair that is yet to be revealed. Agatha's jersey is also a reference to Johnny Depp's first ever movie role in The Nightmare on Elm Street. So there's a TV here filled with static, a reference to this famous scene in Poltergeist.
They're here.
And of course, the teen's costume perfectly matches a homemade Wiccan costume. And that's super fitting because before Wanda realized she was the Scarlet Witch, she also wore a homemade Scarlet Witch style costume. Now, we're going to get more into Wiccan and his powers later on in the video, but I think it's so cool that he is technically wearing a Wiccan costume the entire time. His jeans have always had stars on the side, just like Wiccan in the comic books. When the teen can't find his spell book, Agatha says,
"Forget it. You can take the training wheels off."
Foreshadowing how he'll discover his powers at the end of the episode. Now, when they realize it's Agatha's trial, purple light begins flooding the windows. Fitting because this whole thing is about getting her purple back. Now, when the Ouija board pops out, there's a poster that reads, Point Reyes. Now, that could be a reference to Robbie Reyes, the current Ghost Rider in the comics. He also had ongoing appearances in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, when they open the seance, Agatha says,
Mother Maiden.
Now, as a reminder, she does wear that Mother Maiden Crone pendant at all times, the one we mentioned earlier. Now, the Mother, the Maiden, and the Crone represent 3 cycles of the moon, waxing, full, and waning. It also represents birth, life, and death. Also, she got the Mother Maiden Crone pin from her mother. We even see Evanor wearing it in the WandaVision flashback, so she is literally calling out to her. Notice this board was made in Salem, Massachusetts. Agatha lived there during the witch trial, so this is foreshadowing that Agatha's mom will return to haunt them. I also love that Rio just read Agatha like a book.
She's just scared.
Now, when they ask who's there, the Ouija responds with Death, and Rio just laughs. Now, I think this just furthers the idea that she could be Death. She knows the spirits are toying with her.
But person, how could she be Death? She doesn't look like the Grim Reaper.
Aha, well, Doug, in Marvel Comics, Death doesn't look like the Grim Reaper. In fact, Death is depicted as a woman. In fact, in the comics, the reason he snapped his fingers and got rid of half of the universe is because he was trying to appease Lady Death because, and this gets pretty icky, he's actually like deeply in love and infatuated with her. In fact, there's like a prequel Thanos comic book where they take that to the nth degree and it gets really gross, so we're not going to get into that. But Rio actually seems like she has more in common with DC's depiction of death as seen in the brilliant comic series Sandman. In that series, death is depicted as somebody who is just doing her job. She's actually quite a pleasant person, and she takes it upon herself to escort people into the afterlife. When the house fills with screaming, Lilia says, "I hated this the first time!" Now this is actually a reference to what she saw all the way back in the first episode. They decide to punish Agatha. Now, one of the reasons Agatha is so shaken by this is because it's a callback to the Salem witch trials. Not just the trial against her, but the trials against actual innocent women. Fundamentally, a lot of these women were punished for being different and not fitting into society's mold at the time. And Agatha's different among even her own kind because of her power. And then the lights go out and we get this POV shot of Agatha looking down at the teen. Now, POV shots were popularized in John Carpenter's Halloween, but they were super common in 80s slasher films. And Agatha is looming over them.
I loved it.
Oh my god, where did you come from?
Unimportant. So Agatha's possession is a clear reference to the Evil Dead. In that movie, a group of young adults accidentally calls a demonic entity to their cabin after they listen to some tapes. And then the demon goes on to possess them one by one. I will say the makeup style is a little less Evil Dead and a little more Exorcist. She even has the same bangs that Reagan had in that first movie. Also, her appearing in the rafters totally reminded me of this iconic scene from Hereditary. Oh, and guess what? When she falls, she does the spider walk, which is one of the most iconic deleted scenes ever. Yes, it was not in the original cut of The Exorcist, which is crazy because it's what everyone remembers.
It was real. It was real to me.
Horror, man. Okay, I gotta go.
So wait, where are you?
Bye.
All right, she's gone.
She's so spooky.
God, I know, right? After Agatha chokes Jennifer, she disappears when the lights turn on, and her disappearance turns all of these toys on. Again, this is a classic horror movie trope popularized in Poltergeist. So when Agatha's mother, Evanora, appears, Rio says,
"Hey, ghost."
Now, if she is personified death, then this works perfectly. She hates ghosts because they stay tethered to the earth even after she has taken them.
Man, Marvel CGI is really going downhill.
Well, you're not wrong.
Can you see me?
But this is not lazy CGI. This is actually supposed to evoke the ghosts from the Ghostbusters 1 and Ghostbusters 2. Now, this whole scene is set up like an 80s teen sleepover movie, calling to mind movies like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Slumber Party Massacre. With this in mind, Evanora isn't just a ghost to haunt them. She is literally the adult coming to break up the party.
Stop embarrassing me in front of my friends, Mom.
This whole scene is so interesting. We've never really seen Agatha scared before, not like this. Sure, she ran away from the Salem 7, that's just common sense. But even with Wanda, she was defiant as she stripped her of her power.
So what now? Just gonna lock me up somewhere?
But with her mom, she's actually fearful. She sounds like she's on the verge of tears. She sounds like a little kid.
I can be good, please!
Remember, earlier Jennifer said,
"And with what trauma?"
Now in each trial, the witches had to face some past trauma. For Jennifer, it was being bound.
You are an inconvenient woman.
For Alice, it was her mother's death.
It's my turn now. It's going to kill me.
And for Agatha, it's the mother who hated her.
I ought to have killed you the moment you left my body.
This is so powerful, and it shows a whole new side of Agatha. I mean, think about it. Her biggest trauma should be Wanda. She's the one who actually stole her power and locked her in Westview. Instead, her mother, who's been dead for centuries, is the one who truly haunts her.
The child wound, man.
Ooh, big concept. High five! Notice how Rio reacts.
No! No way!
That's because, as her ex-lover, she knows what her mom did. Not the stylized version that everybody else knows, but the actual traumatic event.
Because her own mother tried to have her executed.
Agatha asks her mom,
Why do you hate me still?
and she says,
You were born evil.
Now, this works on two levels. For one, Agatha's a spirit witch. She takes the power of her own kind. She couldn't control the nature of her gift any more than Lilia or Alice could. Sure, she could try to not use it, but people would still look at her hatefully even for having that ability. It can also be read as a queer allegory. Clearly, Agatha and Rio have a romantic history. And even if she's a witch, she's from 1600 Salem. I doubt they were tolerant with queer people. Agatha's mother doesn't love her because of something she can't control, which unfortunately is a common plight for the LGBTQ community. Jennifer says,
There's no flood here, there's no fire. The only danger to us in this trial
is Agatha Harkness.
And again, that's not just because of her behavior, it's because of her power. When Agatha says,
I can be good, please.
She says it in the same tone that she used to plead with her coven.
Only you would teach me. Help me, please.
When Alice shoots Agatha with her magic, Lilia says, Now, over on our Discord, Lore.monger broke down a ton of tarot cards and how they relate to our series. Major shout out to them. So, Lore.monger said, the Knight of Wands is Alice's card. Now, this card typically represents the spirit of a hero, somebody who is brave, rebellious, and ready to bring about positive change. This fits perfectly with Alice in this moment. It was incredibly brave to save Agatha, especially knowing her abilities. Also, over on Twitter, @Captain Cupcakes pointed out that Lilia's premonitions were actually her telling Alice not to save Agatha.
Alice, don't.
Don't what?
Try to save Agatha.
Agatha starts to take Alice's powers, and notice the planchette writes out Nicholas Scratch after the teen asks,
Who are you?
And we have another great catch from our intern Elias. His ability to say the name might mean that his sigil is broken. After all, Agatha said the sigil was destroyed when it was no longer needed, and the teen can certainly protect himself now. Now, Agatha only stops when she hears his name, and when she hears his voice, it's similar to Wanda hearing her children at the end of WandaVision. Only Wanda's children were begging for her help, whereas Agatha's son begged her to stop. So the teen begs for them to save Alice.
What can you do?
Nothing.
What about your panacea?
It's too late.
No, it's not.
Just like how Billy begged Wanda to undo Sparky's death in WandaVision.
You can fix anything, Mom. Fix it dead.
And it's really poetic that Agatha is responsible for 2 deaths that took away his innocence. The first being Sparky's death that exposed him to the concept of death in the first place, and now Alice's death that broke his rose-colored glasses about witchcraft and sisterhood. When Agatha steps outside, she tries to use Alice's magic, but it literally poofs out in her hand. Now, I don't know if she completely lost the ability or the road just doesn't want her to have powers, but it definitely seems like that she isn't getting her magic back until the end of this journey. So when the teen confronts Agatha, she says,
I couldn't control it.
Was she lying?
We actually think she's telling the truth. All the way back in WandaVision, she says,
I cannot control it.
Now, it seems like a lie at the time because, you know, we saw her as so evil at that point. But if she couldn't control it, then that makes her story really sad.
Yeah, but she looked super duper evil when she took their powers.
Totally, but they were trying to kill her. Now, I'm not saying that it's right, but I don't completely blame her for being angry with them. And then we finally get the reveal. The teen is Billy Kaplan, aka Wiccan, aka Wanda's son.
We all knew.
So, quick rundown on Wiccan. In the comics in the 80s, Vision and Scarlet Witch got married, and then when Agatha was burned at the stake, Wanda took some of her residual energy into herself, and she made herself pregnant with twins. Later on, it was revealed that the twins were figments of her imagination, and they were also part of Mephisto's soul. It gets really complicated, it's not important. The main thing is that in the comics, he was born as this guy, Billy Kaplan, but his soul was the reincarnation of Wanda's baby. So, Billy grew up with a different family, which is why his last name is Kaplan. He becomes a member of the Young Avengers, and, like his mother, has a ton of magical tricks up his sleeve. He's primarily electrokinetic, but his knowledge of spells allow him to go even far beyond that. He can teleport people, he can heal people, levitate himself and other objects, and he can create force fields. The big difference between him and his mom, though, he has to verbally cast the spells. But other than that, I mean, the sky's the limit. He's extremely powerful. Now, they take some liberties with his costume here, but I'm not complaining. In fact, I love the costuming details of his headband. In the comics, it's just like straight across. But I love how they acknowledge his mom with this design. And Elias also pointed out that on the promotional Tower Tarot card for the show, the crown on the top looks like Billy's headband. The tower represents upheaval, and Wiccan entering the show is definitely an upheaval. Also, on the Tower card, there are 2 figures falling, which might represent Lilia and Jennifer being thrown down into the tar. And then we get an epic needle drop with Billie Eilish's You Should See Me in a Crown, which obviously is a reference to the crown on Billy's head. And one last thing, @Pigden0x on Twitter pointed out that the Magician Tarot card is in the middle, which most likely represents Billy's place at the center of this story. That's a great catch. Sorry we missed it. So this episode is titled Familiar by Thy Side, which is of course yet another line from the Ballad of the Witch's Road. But it's also a reference to this line from earlier in the season.
I'm Agatha Harkness. This is my familiar Toto.
Sir, what's a familiar?
So a familiar is a creature that serves a witch. Now they aren't actually animals, but they often take the appearance of animals, like black cats. So we open with William Kaplan's bar mitzvah, a Jewish rite of passage that occurs at age 13. And remember, earlier this season, Billy said,
"All happened to me at 13 too."
Also, notice how it's listed as a magic mitzvah on the program. It's a nice touch, which speaks to the bar mitzvah's theme, which is magic. As we'll see later, Billy Kaplan had a huge interest in magic. Now, next we're introduced to William's birth parents, Jeff and Rebecca Kaplan. So, both in the comics and in this show, they are William's actual birth parents. They're the ones who raised him and who he shares his actual DNA with. Wanda and Vision are only his parents in a metaphysical soul way. So, a friend of the channel and Jewish scholar, Ryan Adams, tweeted some very interesting information about this Torah portion that he reads. It's from Leviticus chapter 10, where Aaron's sons offer a strange fire to the Lord and then are consumed by it, killing them. Essentially, this passage is about two brothers playing with powers they do not understand, similar to Billy resurrecting himself in this episode. Ryan also told me that there is a belief that they were not killed as punishment, but instead taken up to heaven, essentially that they died so then they could live. Again, this is a perfect mirror to what happens to Billy Maximoff's soul in this episode.
Jeez, this show is awesome.
It really is. Now, the decorations at his bar mitzvah feature the moon, just like all of the entrances to the trials. This is fitting because several pieces of furniture and decor from Billy's room show up in the trials, but we're going to get to that in just a bit. Lily is inside the palm reading tent because, of course, she wasn't making that much money as a psychic.
Your bank statement will say Lilia's leggings, but that's just my side hustle.
Now, behind Billy, there are two tapestries displaying tarot cards. The first is the Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune represents cyclical change, and the nature of that change is dependent on whether or not it's reversed or upright. Because this is a tapestry and the card isn't actually played, we could read it either way, as good luck or bad luck. And that's really fitting because, you know, very bad luck for William, but very good luck for Billy. The second card is the Tower, which Lilia also references.
The tower reversed.
And we actually see it reversed when they show Billy upside down in the crystal ball. Now, our Discord member, the Loremonger, created an amazing breakdown of all the tarot references. She said, the tower, when reversed points to internal transformation, suggests a delayed or avoiding disaster. It's a warning that the breakdown of old beliefs or systems is inevitable, but that resisting change could cause even more turmoil in the long run. In this case, the internal transformation is twofold. There's the obvious transformation of William into Billy, but there's also the transformation of Billy's personality. In WandaVision, Billy is very sweet and sensitive, and even the Billy we see pre-Witch's Road is extremely kind. But by the end of this episode, he's saying,
"I'm not that nice."
Also, great catch by our intern Elias, his lifeline doesn't just split off. They're nearly parallel, representing their dual nature and personality differences. And you know what else splits apart?
Chicken wings.
No. Well, yeah, chicken wings split apart, but no, the sacred timeline splits apart. It could be that Billy entering William's body was one of the first branch events after the events of Loki Season 1. Now, it's important to note that a bar mitzvah marks a passage of time and transformation. It's when a boy becomes a man. Just as on this day, William Kaplan essentially leaves the earth, but he is replaced by a new person, Billy Maximoff. I should also note that the tarot cards behind her are the same tarot cards used as promotional images for this show. One of those cards clearly shows Billy and Tommy falling from the tower, mirroring their descent from the Tower of Westview and falling to Earth and finding new bodies. All of these tarot cards also feature the sigil in the corner, which is fitting because they're Lilia's tarot cards and she's the one who cast the sigil to begin with. This clue is in front of us all along. Now, as Billy leaves, he says,
"Love the vibe in here, though. It's very early Argento."
Now he's referencing Dario Argento, an Italian film director. He directed films like Suspiria and Inferno, both of which were heavily visually inspired in episode 4. Both Suspiria and Inferno are part of his Three Mothers trilogy, featuring three witches who want to rule the world. It's also worth mentioning that tarot began in Italy in the 14th century, and Lilia is clearly using a lot of tarot imagery. Now, it turns out that the sigil we've been theorizing about is actually from Lilia, and notice as soon as she places it, she can't remember who he is.
Some kid left this in my tent. Which kid? I don't remember.
And that's because
the sigil works on the witch who cast it as well. That's why we don't use them as much. They're super irritating.
They're all forced to leave because
we've just been informed there's something happening with the anomaly in Westview.
Now this is actually right after Agatha and Wanda were fighting. Notice on the radio they actually picked up some of the WandaVision broadcast.
My husband is a destructible hag.
Now, the car crash itself is symbolically very interesting because William is actually inadvertently killed by Wanda's magic. His parents were looking at the hex instead of the road. So in some ways, Wanda's responsible for her son finding a new body. Now, in the comics, the twins' resurrection is way weirder than this, and this is because of various creators coming along over the years to put their various stamps on these characters. As we've talked about in past videos, Bill Mantlo and Rick Leonardi created a limited series where Wanda uses residual energy from Agatha's death to create her twins. And then later in West Coast Avengers, writer-artist John Byrne changed this to say that Wanda's kids were never real. They were shards of Mephisto's soul. And then Alan Heinberg's Young Avengers retconned this once again, saying that Wanda reconfiguring those shards of Mephisto's soul permanently altered them, so they were reincarnated into the bodies of two teenage boys, which is essentially what happens in the series, just without all that Mephisto stuff. Now, another thing to note is that the name Rio Vidal literally translates into River of Life, which could be a reference to the river Styx, the river that separated the earth and the underworld in Greek mythology. This ties into the theory that Rio is actually the MCU's incarnation of Mistress Death. So I wonder if she'll ever reference that William Kaplan started to cross this barrier of death, but then was pulled back by Billy's soul. Also, we've seen references to this car crash earlier in the show. In the credits, there's a newspaper talking about it. And we also had Detective Agnes's theory on how Wanda died.
There was a car wreck about an hour before time of death.
And it turns out she was right. The car crash in Eastview was connected to her death. Now, the cop that first arrives on the scene is Alice, you know, from before she got fired from her job.
Your old lieutenant convinced me to give you a shot, but you've been nothing but bad luck.
And this really shows how they're switching from Agatha as the main character to Billy as the main character. Now, while Agatha is technically the one who brought them together, Billy is the one who actually has history with them. We cut to Billy in this hospital, and I love this framing. It's like he's being watched from behind a screen. The only way he's been viewed up until this point. Literally everyone who wasn't in the anomaly only ever saw him on television, and his balloons are even green, red, and blue, the primary colors of an old tube television and the color of the glitch that they used during the credits of WandaVision. Also, I loved this little detail.
He's gonna make fun of me.
It's fine, just please don't fight.
Now, this isn't just brilliant because it shows that he's still getting used to his powers. It also shows us how much this is, in fact, Billy Maximoff and not William Kaplan. Billy's interacting with them like they're also telepaths because he is used to being around telepaths like his mom. It doesn't even occur to him that other people aren't expecting him to read their minds and vice versa. So when we cut to his house, we get another TV metaphor. The door has a small window that looks like a TV screen, and when it opens, Billy is literally stepping into the real world, like a less creepy version of Samara. Now, this is also a visual reference to The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy first walks out of the sepia world of her Kansas home into the colorful world of Oz. As we're going to talk about later, the show possesses many parallels and metaphors and callbacks to The Wizard of Oz. Now, the dog here doesn't recognize him because he knows that he is an imposter. This is Billy dressed up as William. Now, when Billy couldn't block out the sounds of his parents,
Please stop, please just stop.
It reminded us of this scene from X2.
Hands to the shelter.
We cut to Billy's room, and there are a lot of references in here. First of all, we see a poster of Houdini, the famous magician from the turn of the 20th century. This shows us that William had a strong interest in magic, which is why he had a magic-themed bar mitzvah, but also Harry Houdini was Jewish, which would also make him an inspiration for young Jewish magician William Kaplan. Now, there's also a print depicting the land of Cockaigne. Cockaigne? No, Cockaigne. It's a medieval mythical land run by Gluttony, and this guy up here is actually a wizard. Now, this illustration is actually from Gargantua and Pantagruel, a 16th century satire primarily aimed at Emperor Charles V. The titular characters were giants who lived extremely hedonistic and gluttonous lives. These two prints referring to gluttony make me think that deep down, maybe Billy really does want more power. Now, we see a poster for Assateague Island in the same style as this poster from last episode, and the Eastview flag that was above the door. And all throughout his bedroom, we're going to see a lot of things here that made it into the trials. There is an Alice in Wonderland poster, a reference to how Billy fell down the rabbit hole by entering the Witch's Road. There's a Wonderful Wizard of Oz poster, which is actually different from the movie. This is actually the cover of the book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And right here, there are also references to Wizard of Oz characters on the shelves. We see Dorothy, the Wicked Witch of the West, the Lion, and the Scarecrow. Now, since the first episode of this show, we have talked about the similarities here to The Wizard of Oz, from the Yellow Brick Road crime tape, to the Witch's Road being a path through the woods, even to Herb quoting this song.
Oh, she's really most sincerely dead.
Which actually I didn't catch. Somebody on our Discord told me that, and I was really embarrassed that I missed it. And then we see this poster for Narnia, another mythical land that children fall into where they lead off onto adventures, similar to what happens to Billy. And we see this poster for the Black Cauldron. So all of this is showing that William Kaplan's tastes are very much geared towards sword and sorcery style adventures. Now, the inclusion of the Black Cauldron may just seem like they're pulling from like the random Disney catalog, but this is actually an interesting choice for a few reasons. One, it was the first Disney animated film to be PG. It scared the living hell out of me when I was a kid. Now, I do think this movie poster could be foreshadowing eventual plots for this show, but for now, I just want to note that the titular Black Cauldron was owned by 3 terrifying witches, like the Mother Maiden Crone locket that Agatha wears. The movie also features a pig that has psychic powers and can detect this Black Cauldron. I can't help but see some parallels here between the pig's abilities and Billy's, with Billy having these instinctual powers that he can't actually control. I also think there's some connection here to how Agatha referred to him as Pet in the first few episodes, and Henwin the pig being an actual pet. Now we also see a poster for Bedknobs and Broomsticks, another Disney classic about a witch taking children on a magical journey to another land, essentially what the Coven does with Billy. And the poster next to that is for a fictional movie called The Goofballs. Now this is a clear nod to this poster from The Goonies. We have the same font, some kids in the foreground, and a pirate ship. Now The Goonies was an inspiration for the original draft of WandaVision's final episode, where the twins, Monica and Ralph Bohner, would have snuck into Agatha's house to find the Darkhold, and then they fought Senor Scratchy.
That rabbit's got a vicious streak a mile wide. It's a killer.
This is all according to WandaVision's original director Matt Shakman, who told the Fat Man Beyond podcast that this was a, quote, Goonies set piece. Also look, Billy has the same moon chandelier that we saw in episode 3. So when Billy says,
"My name is William Kaplan,"
there are actually 2 mirrors to show that while he might present this way on the outside, Billy is still on the inside. This is a visualization of his split. So we enter Billy's updated bedroom, and like Dorothy stepping from Kansas into Oz, it looks completely different. Gone are the posters related to children's movies, and now they've been replaced by horror films. There's Jennifer's Body, a beloved cult classic in the queer community.
Thought you only murdered boys.
I go both ways.
There's Saw, which we mentioned in episode 3. The basic premise of Saw is that people are up against a ticking clock or they die, much like the trials on the road. There's also the 1974 version of Carrie, which was another heavy visual reference in the 1970s trial. And there's The Craft, the 90s drama about teen witches, which we actually see in the credits. Billy's bedroom is a clear reflection of how he's grown up, and we even see this in the end credits. The first half of the credits is littered with older witch references, typically more associated with children, like The Wizard of Oz. But the second half actually has horror witches like The Craft. There are also several pieces of decor in the trials that are pulled directly from this room. For example, these triangle lights were in Agatha's trial, and this Fleetwood Mac poster is in Alice's trial. Also, I gotta point out the Evanescence Fallen album poster. It is a classic emo teen album. Then we see these newspaper clippings, some of which we also saw in the credits, like examining the Red Dome anomaly and its impact. Then we find out that SWORD has been covering up the Westview incident.
I thought that turned out to be some Avengers training exercise gone wrong.
Now it appears as if for years, SWORD and the entire US government have been a lot more conniving behind the scenes. This was first explored in WandaVision with Tyler Hayward illegally resurrecting the Vision, and then we saw more of this in Wakanda Forever and Falcon and the Winter Soldier with Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. And with the Thunderbolts coming out next year, I wouldn't be surprised if we hear about this Westview cover-up again. Billy was watching one of Jennifer's videos, and I just want to point out that based on the view count, her business was not doing well. Billy recognizes the ruins, and we get the return of Ralph Bohner from WandaVision. And in case you don't remember, Ralph was Agatha's husband and also took on the mantle of Pietro. And this was, of course, a cheeky reference to actor Evan Peters playing Quicksilver in the Fox X-Men films. And we also love that Teddy goes with him for scary dog privileges. Also, there's another horror reference. Ralph is dressed as the killer from I Know What You Did Last Summer. And when Ralph says this,
it was like watching yourself on TV inside your own head.
It sounds a lot like the sunken place from Get Out. He also says,
wake up every hour in the middle of the night screaming,
which may be a reference to this phenomenon from WandaVision.
We have your nightmares.
Now, it's great that we see how both Wanda and Agatha deeply traumatize these people. I'm glad that they're not softening the impact of that. Ralph says,
she called me your husband, but I was her puppet.
A nod to the running gag in WandaVision.
The only way Ralph would remember our anniversary is if there was a beer named June 2nd.
He also says,
I have this really nice lady hostage in my attic.
A reference to this scene between him and Monica.
This is my man cave. Place to chillax, while the
Missus is stirring up trouble.
Now, one thing I find really interesting is that nobody outside of Westview knows what actually happened in the Hex, but everybody seems to know that Wanda is dead. So I'm curious how they know and what the story Sword spun around here. He also says,
Left my entire Blu-ray collection behind.
And in his house, we see a collection of Blu-rays. He also mentions a Bowflex, which remember, Star-Lord also promised that he would start using.
Agatha can keep my Bowflex.
I'm gonna get a Bowflex. I'm gonna commit.
Also, I'm glad to see that Ralph is still acting.
I'll give you half off tickets to my one-man show in Paramus.
Now, when Billy goes back to his house, his parents say,
Wouldn't know Eddie?
So in the comics, Hulkling is actually named Teddy. Now, clearly these names are really similar, so I still think this could be our MCU Hulkling. But my guess is that they changed the name because this will be the MCU's version of Hulkling that's going to differ from the comic version of the character. Also, Jeff says,
Oh man, I made that pot roast you like so much. I even made the potatoes in the air fryer. They're super crispy.
A callback to his cooking prowess in episode 3.
It heats water to a specific temperature so you can cook your meat evenly. My dad loves his.
So when Billy goes up to his room, there is a corkboard with a ton of stuff about the sigil. Now I want to point out this note in particular. It says, destructible sigils, activated by being destroyed, creates a burst of energy that gives the sigil power. Write, carve, or singe sigil onto paper, wood, food, or object and destroy by fire or force. And we don't actually see Billy destroy the sigil until the end of this episode. Maybe the sigil simply wouldn't allow him to reveal his identity because Lilia was not allowed to remember who Billy was. And it's actually just now that the protection sigil is actually activating. This could explain why he was vulnerable on the road. After all, he almost died. Also behind Billy is the Moon Tarot card. Now this is obviously a reference to all the moon imagery throughout the trial.
Yeah, you know, I got an Easter egg.
Oh, that's cute, buddy. What's your little Easter egg?
Well, yeah, when Billy got home, the dog barked at him, and on the bottom of the Moon Tarot card, there are 2 dogs barking, and that symbolizes both life and death. It's also thought that dogs can see souls, so the dog did not recognize this new soul inside William's body.
How did you know all that?
Yeah, dude, I know a lot about dogs. What's the big deal?
Then Billy starts searching for information on Agatha Harkness and the Witches Road on his computer, which we also see in the credits. We also see a site titled Witches and Aging that says some witches choose to stop again at a certain point, staying roughly 30 years old visually for hundreds of years. Now obviously Agatha looks way younger than her years. I don't think she's 30. After all, Catherine Hahn is 51, and I'm really enjoying seeing older women on screen since they don't often get that kind of opportunity in Hollywood. But I think that Jennifer is actually stuck at 30. Sashir Zameda is in her 30s, and honestly, she looks even younger to me. We see a post claiming people survived the Salem witch trials, a clear reference to the flashback that we saw in WandaVision. And in this old-timey photo, she's also wearing the Mother Maiden Crone pendant that she wears throughout the entire series.
But why was she at all those disasters? Does she just got real bad luck?
Nope, my guess is she was there because she was dating Rio. We have theorized several times that Rio is actually the MCU's personification of death. So, if they were dating, it makes complete sense that Rio needs to be at these major disaster sites and Agatha was just along for the ride. Also, I loved that Agatha was Dolly Parton's Jolene. That also implies that she was a redhead at some point, and let me see that please. There's a reference from Brujopedia, a reference to brujeria, a form of witchcraft popular in Latin America. It's a mix of indigenous, African, and European practices that form a distinct practice on its own. On Brujopedia, we see a list of names. There's Abigail Adams, the former First Lady of the United States. She was also a fierce proponent of civil rights and the abolition of slavery, 2 tenets of the Ladies of Liberty. And it's also worth noting that the child who started the Salem witch trials was Abigail Williams. Now, as far as I can tell, the rest of the names on the list are all new to Marvel, which fits in with the lore that witches are not well documented. As Billy researches Agatha, his attention is caught by his Ballad of the Witches Road vinyl, which is the exact same vinyl that we saw in Alice's trial. In his book, Billy reads that at the end of the Witches Road, a witch may find what's missing. Now, this is clearly a reference to Tommy, but it could also reference Nicholas Scratch. Again, we really don't think he's dead because we heard his voice last episode, and Agatha doesn't know what happened to him. So instead of getting her powers at the end, she may instead find her son. Billy goes to Westview, now of course stopping in front of the house that was originally for Wanda and Vision. When he double checks the release spell, he has moon phases drawn all over his book. Now moon magic is a particular type of witchcraft that believes the moon's phase affects the power and strength of the spell. We've seen this throughout the show, as well as with all the references to moon phases in the various trials. And then we find out that Teddy calls Billy his black heart. Now, up until now, we thought that the black heart on Lilia's list referenced Rio because of this line.
It's black, and it beats for you.
But it's actually been Billy all along. So this also means that Rio is a true interloper in their coven. She is not supposed to be there. So this scene of Billy walking up to Agatha's house is just like the scene of the sword agent entering the hex in WandaVision. When Billy sneaks into her house, he finds the Mother Maiden Crone pin in a little baggie. Now, in WandaVision, Agatha wears that pin at all times, including in the final fight. So my guess is that they took her clothes and costume for evidence at some point, and then this is how they returned the pin. And since then, Agatha has not worn it again. Also, Agatha is wearing a Boner family reunion shirt that she must have found in Ralph's house. So classic. And notice that the shirt says, pitching a tent.
Because people named Boner are excellent campers. Hilarious!
Exactly. So this is actually the exact same scene from the first episode, but now we're seeing it as it actually happened, not as Agatha saw it. And it really shows the strength of Wanda's spell, because Agatha isn't only visually seeing different things, but she is hearing completely different things. In the original scene, Billy was pretty bratty, but here he's as polite as you can be after trying to rob someone. Now, after the real scene, we cut back to the witch's road. Agatha crawling out of the mud is a reference to the creature from the Black Lagoon. Look, her hands even looked webbed here because of the mud. It could also be a reference to the plethora of zombie movies featuring zombies crawling out of their graves.
Yeah, why is she the only one who crawls out?
Well, Agatha can't die. She says it in the first episode.
You can't kill me. It's not allowed.
And I'm pretty sure that is because of Wanda's spell. In Infinity War, Doctor Strange says,
"You'll find removing a dead man's spell troublesome."
And in the last episode, we saw Agatha absorb Alice's power, but she couldn't keep that power. She may have broken out of the mind aspect of Wanda's spell, but she still deals with the physical aspects. That includes immortality, so she can't off herself and just be done with it. Agatha says,
"A sigil, what's that? Power is what I'm missing." Hardly.
And I want to make it clear, Billy has been manipulating this coven the whole time. He's been pretending to be relatively clueless so they would trust him. In reality, he's known who he is the entire time. He may have even known what he was capable of. Now in the comics, he discovers his powers after nearly killing a school bully. So I'm very curious about whether or not this is the first time his powers have actually shown themselves, or if he always knew that he had this in the bag. I also love the acting choices here from Catherine Hahn in this scene.
What you did was... but life goes on. Yours, anyway.
We've seen a softer side of her in the last few episodes, but she was obviously extremely triggered by the reappearance of her mother, and no one believed that she couldn't control her power.
Don't lie to me.
So I'm really glad that she has reverted to this mean, callous version of herself. The villain persona was created to protect herself, and once she felt threatened, she went right back into that protective shell. It also just makes her into a more fun and realistic villain. In the past, Marvel's changed villains at the drop of a hat, so I'm glad we actually have a back and forth with her. He says,
"I'm not like you,"
which is exactly what Wanda said to Agatha.
"I'm not what you say I am."
Agatha says,
"I just gotta know, where did you come by this fresh body you're wearing?"
And this is an amazingly consistent characterization. In WandaVision, Agatha didn't just want Wanda's powers, she wanted to know how she created the Hex.
I need you to tell me how you did this.
She could have taken her powers at any time, but instead, she decided to go through an episode's worth of trauma just to learn how Wanda's magic worked. She's very intellectually curious.
Years of study to achieve even the smallest convincing illusion.
And then Agatha says,
"Don't you dare feel guilty about your talent."
Which is definitely something she tells herself. Her powers are taboo even among witches, and even in this villainous state, she does not want Billy to feel the same shame that she felt. She also says,
"So you broke the rules, big deal."
Which is actually a reference to Multiverse of Madness.
"Possessing a dead body is forbidden."
I also love the reveal that he can't control his powers.
I can't do it on command.
He can't do it on command.
We also see elements of this with Wanda in the MCU. Especially in Age of Ultron, her powers were very emotion-based and caused giant bursts when she was sad or angry. Agatha says,
"You're after Toby."
Tommy.
That's what I said.
Which is also a nod to the fact that she could not remember Sharon's name.
Who's Sharon?
Billy says,
"I can sense him, I just can't find him."
Which is also what Wanda felt in the post-credits of WandaVision. So I am curious if he is in this universe. Wanda says,
"Gosh, you really are a Maximoff. Otherwise, none of this would be nearly as dramatic."
Which is pretty funny given that she made her own intro music for her own reveal.
It's been Agatha all along.
And then they turn to walk down the road, which is now covered in yellow leaves. This is a clear reference to the yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz, which of course William Kaplan loved. God, what a great episode. I loved finding out more about Billy. I'm really happy they brought him back in this way. It's way simpler than in the comics. So the title of this episode is Death's Hand in Mine, which is a line from the Ballad of the Witch's Road, just like all the other titles in this season. Now, the reference here is obvious. Lilia dies at the end of the episode. She literally courts death. But there's another layer to it. You see, Lilia's walked hand in hand with death for her entire life because of her divination power. Her foresight made her unable to escape death even when it wasn't her time. Rio even alludes to that when she says,
"Don't you recognize me, Lilia?"
The episode opens on Lilia falling, and notice the yellow haze around her eyes. Now, originally I thought it was from the trees, but she fell through the tar. But you know what else was framed this way? Wanda's first encounter with the Scarlet Witch. Later, Lilia says,
"I saw what was going to happen to you that night. I saw who you were and who you would become."
And she knows as soon as she wakes up that Billy is Wanda's son.
The son of the Scarlet Witch telepathically kicked us off the road.
I bet Lilia remembered everything she saw at Billy's bar mitzvah, which may have included a vision of the Scarlet Witch. The fall itself is a reference to the sunken place in Get Out. Now, it might seem random, but in both cases, the characters can't control their own minds. In Get Out, Chris is forced into hypnosis, while in this show, Lilia can't keep her thoughts straight because she's experienced her life so out of sequence. We cut to Agatha and Billy on the Witch's Road, and notice that the leaves are yellow, a nod to the yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz. Agatha says,
"I'll get a nosebleed trying that hard to read my mind."
which is a callback to this line in WandaVision.
My thoughts are not available to you, Toots. They never ever were.
Then she says,
Any other queries for your old babysitter?
now in WandaVision, Agatha's their babysitter for one episode.
I promise I won't bite. I actually did bite a kid once.
But this is also a comic Easter egg. In the comics, Agatha originally appeared as Franklin Richards' nanny, and later on, after Wanda had her twins, Agatha Harkness was their governess as well. Billy says,
"She's not my mom. I have a mom."
and this is another dynamic that is explored in the comics. Billy's in a weird situation where he literally has two moms, his mystical birth mother and then the woman who actually raised him. And for the first time since Multiverse of Madness, Marvel acknowledges that Wanda may be alive.
Is Wanda Maximoff really dead?
Yes. No. Maybe.
In fact, it really suggests that she is alive because of this.
Did you see a body?
Yes, I did.
Did anybody else?
It's hard to say.
We know that no one else saw a body because when Agatha shows Billy the pictures, they're actually photos of flowers. And we can assume that Herb didn't see the body because if he did, he'd be freaking out. After all, he was not in a cop show hex. He would just be an average citizen seeing a dead person. Also, great musical choice here. You can actually hear the WandaVision theme.
Yes, I did.
Did anybody else?
It's hard to say.
The road leads them to a castle, a clear reference to the Wicked Witch of the West Castle and the Wizard of Oz. And notice that Agatha says,
"The road is a fickle mistress,"
which could refer to Hecate, the goddess of magic. On the drawbridge, we see a waxing gibbous moon. Elementally, a waxing moon is associated with air, foreshadowing how Lilia will kill the Salem Seven by changing the direction of the room, causing them to fall through the air. Additionally, the waxing gibbous phase is associated with finality because it's the final phase before a full moon. This fits perfectly with Lilia. Throughout this episode, she's literally heading towards the final moments of her life. It's also perfectly timed with the show because this is the last episode before the two-part finale. When they enter the trial, Agatha turns into the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, and Billy turns into Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. And notice that these are two witches that were massively retconned in pop culture. The Wicked Witch of the West was most famously changed in the book Wicked, which then became the musical, where she went from an evil magic user to a misunderstood, powerful witch standing up to a corrupt system. Disney has also had its own Wicked Witch of the West retcon in Oz, the Great and Powerful. Now, in that movie, she's more evil, but it's still a lot more understandable. Now, obviously, that movie's had nowhere near the impact of Wicked, but hey, Marvel is a Disney property, so we thought we should mention it. Maleficent's also had a major retcon, spearheaded by Disney in 2014's Maleficent and its sequel, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. In that movie, Maleficent changes from an evil witch to a woman scorned and a mother figure to Aurora. These costume choices were not accidental. They're hinting that both Billy and Agatha aren't evil, but are simply misunderstood. Also, I love the idea that Agatha just inspired all of these pop culture villains.
She's based on me, you know.
And this is also a callback to her bike and basket in WandaVision, which of course was a callback to Mrs. Gulch, aka the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. The table reads, "Your path winds out of time." This refers to Lilia, who's skipping around time, as well as the actual episode structure. But I want to point out this isn't the first time we've seen this done in the MCU. Loki literally slipped around time in season 2, and any characters like Deadpool and Wolverine who are pulled out of their universe and plopped into new ones are also out of time, as they are literally out of their own timeline. Also, around the edges of the table, there's both astrological signs and planetary symbols. Astrology actually goes way deeper than people think. The basic sign most people know is like their own sun sign, but there's actually 12 signs that make up your entire astrological chart, including all of the planets as well as the moon and ascendant. There are also gold scarabs carved into the base of the table. Now, scarabs represent rebirth, which could symbolize how Lilia finds herself in her final tarot reading. So this is the tarot trial, and in case you aren't familiar with tarot, let us explain. Tarot is a divination practice that uses 78 cards, each with their own specific meaning. A practiced tarot reader not only knows every card, but they can figure out how they all work together.
Proper tarot takes time and care.
The first card that Billy pulls for Agatha is the Chariot. The Chariot embodies victory, specifically through control and determination, and this is the ethos of the episode. Lilia powered through all the gaps, remembered who she was, and returned to her love of witchcraft, which allowed her to overcome both the trial and the Salem 7. The next card Billy pulls is the Seven of Swords reversed, which does not symbolize truthfulness, as Billy says.
But it's reversed. So that means the opposite.
Instead, it symbolizes self-deceit and secrets. The next card is pulled by Agatha. It's the Hanged Man. Now, the Hanged Man is about sacrifice, which hints that we'll find out what happened between Agatha and Nicholas in the finale. In this overhead shot, we can see all the cards she pulled. The first is the Two of Wands, which symbolizes being unable to make a decision, or being pulled between two things. I think in this case, she'll be pulled between Rio and Billy, or Nicholas and Billy. The next card is the Wheel of Fortune, which we also saw last episode. This represents the cycles of change and fate as a whole. And then we see the World card, which focuses on completion and fulfillment. Now, because of its placement in the spread, it shows obstacles that she might face, implying that achieving her goal will lead to more difficulties. We also see the Page of Swords, which can represent new ways to communicate, which for Agatha is just any honest communication at all. And then the last card we see is the Ten of Swords, which symbolizes complete failure and exhaustion. In the spread, it's in the destination slot, and in the trailer, we heard Agatha say, "I want So my guess is that the road is not going to give her what she wants. Also, as she madly pulls the cards, she just lets out a stereotypical witch cackle, just like Rio did on the broom. We switch to Lilia and Jen, who are in the tunnels beneath the road. And then we see exactly what's been happening during all of those weird blips in the season.
Kooky. Which is it? Am I wispy or am I kooky?
So I love the use of a fisheye lens here. It just makes everything feel so distorted and off. It really puts us in her shoes. And then we see little Lilia in Sicily. Now, tarot was actually created in Italy in the 1500s, but here they're using tea leaves. So I wonder if Lilia actually created tarot cards in this universe. At the very least, we can assume that she was an early adopter. Also notice, even as a child, she is wearing the same necklace, and it matches the necklace that her teacher is wearing. Later in the episode, she tries to claim that she doesn't want a coven, but in reality, she has worn a piece of jewelry related to her coven for more than 500 years. Her teacher also wears a similar necklace, but hers is more like an infinity sign, echoing the sentiment that time is a circle.
It's like a snake eating its own tail.
There's also a sounding bowl on the table. Now, typically sounding bowls are used to ground people in the present. It could mean that the teacher was trying to prevent Lilia from slipping all those years ago. Back in the tunnel, she says,
"The flow of time is an illusion, Jen. Most people don't realize that."
Which, again, is a lot like season 2 of Loki.
Yeah, or like when Billy Pilgrim comes unstuck in time and Kurt Vonnegut's seminal work, Slaughterhouse 5.
Or like in that. Then we switch to the trial, which now includes Lilia. She is dressed as the Good Witch Glinda from The Wizard of Oz. And notice they even put a little eye on her crown to represent her second sight. But this is the first time she is not wearing her pendant. This symbolizes that she has now let go of her trauma with her old coven and has actually allowed herself to join this new coven. Jen is costumed as the evil queen from Snow White. So this outfit stands in stark contrast to her beauty-obsessed persona from earlier episodes. On our Discord server, one of our users, Loremonger, theorized that this could symbolize Jen letting go of some of her own vanity. After all, the evil queen's main goal was to be the fairest maiden in the land. Agatha says,
"At your prompting,
Dory.
Back off, Agatha, she's having a day.
And I have to point out, this implies that at some point, Agatha watched Finding Nemo. Darkhold Agatha Harkness watched a kids movie, and if Marvel was brave, they would give us an Agatha and Madison with the Y watch party scene. Jen says,
Focus up, Calderu. We can be culturally offended later.
And that actually hints to a lot of issues with classic witch portrayals. Witches are always portrayed as old, ugly, or disabled, which villainize real people with those physical traits. Lilia says,
I saw what was going to happen to you that night. I saw who you were and who you would become.
Which lends credence to our theory that she saw Secret Wars. Lilia skips through time until she is with her teacher again. When she asks if she has a coven, Lilia says,
It didn't work out for me the first time. It's sure not going well now. It's better to be a hermit.
So the Hermit is another tarot card that represents solitude and introspection. The Hermit is inherently alone, and this goes against the very nature of witchcraft. Lilia has chosen to isolate herself away from a coven, not only diminishing her own power, but separating her from her own culture. All of these trials center around the witch facing their trauma. Earlier in the episode, her teacher says,
This is a fiction you told yourself and tell yourself still. The easy road.
It was easier for her to hide from her own gift and her connection with others than it was for her to face her trauma. But in doing so, she also robbed herself of her own healing and enlightenment. A spiritual journey is never easy. It requires work. And it's sad that Lilia only reaches enlightenment moments before her death. Her mother also says,
Your task is not to control, but to see.
Which is a common refrain in spiritual teaching. We cannot control the world, and trying to control it only leads to more suffering.
Every time someone tries to win a war before it starts, innocent people die. Every time.
Instead, we just have to see or acknowledge what is around us and deal with it as it comes. We head back to the tunnels, and I want to highlight this interaction between Lilia and Jen.
You said this used to happen to you when you were younger. Why did it stop?
Because I wanted it to. Because all I saw was death.
Later, Lilia says that Jen is the path forward, and it's because these characters are mirrors. For one, Lilia spent her entire life around death. Meanwhile, Jen's ability allowed her to bring new life into the world via her obstetrics practice. Lilia is also running away from her power, while Jen would do anything to get it back. Trauma prevents them both from accessing their own full power, but on opposite sides of the spectrum. Lilia and Jen hop into the trial, and notice they come in right after Billy says,
Wish Lilia was here.
Like his mother, he is way more in tune with magic than he knows. To the tarot, Billy asks,
Am I William or am I Billy?
And I think this will be very important. Billy clearly wants to find his brother, but he doesn't ask about him here. Now, we've theorized that Agatha's greatest wish isn't actually to get her power back, but rather it's to know what happened to her son. For Billy, his actual greatest wish is to know who he is. At the end of the road, that's the knowledge he'll actually gain. And then, the Tommy plot point can be resolved in the show Vision Quest. It also might reflect how Billy doesn't want to be the Scarlet Witch's son. In the comics, the Avengers are scared that he'll lose control, just like his mom did. And in this show, he's very touchy about his relationship with her.
She's not my mom.
He might be scared that people will villainize him if they know that he is related to her. The first card that Billy pulls is the Magician.
You have enormous potential and the ability to turn all of your goals into reality.
And notice how Agatha looks at him. It's all because of that little word, reality. Wanda's chaos magic literally lets her bend reality to her will, and this isn't necessarily a good thing. Remember, the most powerful displays of her power was the Hex, where she bent reality but at the expense of everyone else. We also see this card in the credits surrounded by 5 other cards, presumably the other members of the Coven. And I can't believe that we just noticed this, but the word fate is circled in red. And on the release schedule poster, episode 6 was also circled in red, aka the episode that revealed Billy's fate. Oh my god, this show is so good. The next card Billy pulls is the Sun.
The sun, good fortune, joy, reunion.
And this is, of course, referring to a potential reunion with Tommy. When another sword falls, Lilia flips through time, and it's revealed what happened to her coven.
Our entire coven wiped out by a fever? I saw it.
Now, we actually saw hints of that in episode 3, when Lilia sees a member of her coven standing with death. In that episode, she even says, she also says,
I'm a forgotten woman.
And this is a very common sentiment among older women. Our society really values youth, and it's even more intense for women because of the insane beauty standards. Women over a certain age are just pushed aside and ignored by the general public. Even a TV show like this, where the majority of the cast is women above the age of 40, is exceedingly rare. And unfortunately, many women internalize those feelings and stop themselves from experiencing life because they feel like they're too old. So it's very empowering to see an older woman achieving this enlightenment and continue to chase her goals. Then, Lilia says,
I was falling. I will fall.
And suddenly the imagery on her necklace makes sense. The two hands reflecting each other is a reference to the phrase, as above, so below, which was popular among occultists in the 1800s. As above, so below essentially refers to celestial mechanics, how the Earth changes cyclically, resulting in one giant loop. As such, time really is a flat circle instead of a linear progression, and Lilia, as a character, can hop through this circular time pattern because it's all happening at once. She has fallen, she will fall, and she is falling at all times. And also, she begins to kind of control when she's able to slip. For example, instead of being thrown around like she's been in the past, Lilia intentionally looks at Jen before she's even slipped to the next time. So, in the tunnels, they see a train, which is actually a reference to something that Sharon said earlier in the season.
All I would have expected to see down here were remnants of our failed public transit system.
But I thought the road existed outside of time and space.
Well, it does, but there are probably places where the barrier between dimensions is thinner. We saw this all the way back in the Dark World when Jane Foster found the ether. And more recently, we saw this with incursions, like we saw in Spider-Man No Way Home and in the Marvels. And then the Salem 7 show up. Now, I cannot get over how creepy they are. They're taking references from the creepiest witch media, including American Horror Story and Suspiria, with a tiny dash of Lord of the Rings Black Riders thrown in there. The costumes, particularly the headpieces, even remind me of the Bene Gesserit from Dune. Once again, Lilia chooses when and where she's going to slip through time when she goes back into the trial.
I know what I did wrong. My path winds out of time.
When Lilia says,
I am the traveler.
It's not just because she is the traveler in the specific tarot reading, but because she is the traveler through life. She travels the time stream, so to speak. The first card she pulls up is the Queen of Cups.
Empathetic, intuitive, inner voice to be trusted.
And this also goes along with the moon phase that we saw at the entrance. The waxing gibbous moon is in the air phase, and air signs are known for their intuitive and communicative nature. The next card she pulls is the Three of Pentacles.
Singular voice is waiting to harmonize. I needed you, my coven.
Which reiterates that Lilia missed out on her potential by isolating herself. She needed a coven, and the only way for them to get to the end is to work as a coven together. And then she pulls the Knight of Wands and says,
path behind.
So yes, unfortunately, Alice is dead. Then she confirms that Jen is the High Priestess.
Immense spiritual power, unable or unwilling to use it.
It's revealed that Agatha is the Three of Swords, and notice she is in the obstacles placement. And then finally, we get the Tower reversed, which we saw last episode.
It means miraculous transformation.
Now, this is actually Tommy and Billy on the card, and the cool thing about its reversal is that they are no longer falling. Instead, they're floating upwards, as in floating away from the hex to find new bodies. And then we finally get the Rio as Death reveal that we've been waiting for all season.
Rio is...
I love the design they used. She is based off of Lady Death from the comics, and we've actually seen her once before in this show during Lilia's hallucination.
So who's Lady Death?
Great question. So, according to Marvel themselves, Death is a cosmic entity who has existed since the creation of the universe. She generally rules over the realm of death and oversees lesser gods of death and the afterlife, like the Asgardian Hela. So yeah, Rio is like Hela's boss. Now we have to note that Death and Thanos have a weird relationship in the comics. Essentially, he performs the snap because he is in love with her. They probably won't retcon that into the MCU, but who knows? Maybe it was Rio all along. Also, notice that in one hand she holds a knife, and in the other hand she holds a flower. Death in tarot is not as horrifying as it sounds. It symbolizes ending, but it also means rebirth. This entire episode has focused on the fact that time is cyclical, and death can serve as an embodiment of that. So on one hand, Rio holds a tool to kill, but in the other, she holds the creation of new life. And if you really want to get dark, the flower represents creation of new life through death. When people or animals die, their decomposing bodies feed the soil, leading to creation of new plant life. And this is why Rio isn't a green witch, but she is literally nature, both death and the life that sprouts from it.
More the green witch.
When it's revealed, Agatha says,
"What can I say? I like the bad boys."
But I think it's actually deeper than that. Rio is actually one of the few people who has witchy abilities that Agatha is incapable of killing. They say that in the first episode.
So take my power.
It's cute.
But you know that would kill me.
Now because of that, Rhea wasn't horrified by her powers like everybody else, but she also probably led her down a dark and murderous path, like she did to Thanos in the comics. Lilia says,
Everyone in the Iron Maiden.
Now Iron Maidens were a torture device from the medieval period. Now I don't want to get into it because they were just brutal, but just know it is a very, very bad way to die.
So are we going to talk about the fact that Lilia is literally Glinda?
Where do you keep showing up from?
I told you, it's not important. But what is important is that Lilia is literally Glinda, and she restored the entire coven just like the wizard and Glinda did in The Wizard of Oz. As she's leaving, she tells Agatha,
When she calls you a coward, hit the deck.
which I'm guessing is the info she'll need to get home, just like Linda tells Dorothy about the shoes.
Tap your heels together 3 times and think to yourself, there's no place like home.
And she gives Billy his spellbook back, literally giving him a brain just like the Scarecrow in Wizard of Oz. And most touchingly, throughout this whole episode, she's given Jennifer a heart. In episode 3, Jennifer rushed to the exit. She was the first one out of there. And in episode 4, she almost didn't leave her protection circle.
So what, you live in that circle now?
Maybe. All she has cared about this entire time was herself and making sure she was safe. She's helped others, but never at risk to herself. But in this episode, she says,
I'm not going before you.
She put Lilia's safety in front of her own. Their relationship gave Jennifer a heart, just like the Tin Man. It's such good writing, especially because just an episode ago, Lilia would have hated being Glinda because she hates all the stereotypes. She's able to accept her role not just as a witch, but as a protector and as a helper. It's such a great arc for her.
So then Lilia says,
I loved being a witch.
And that is a huge turn for her character. All she's said up to now is how she hates being a witch, and how much she resents all of the stereotypes.
Do you see any pointy hats in here? Any green skin? Any brooms? No, sir.
But now, in a literal movie costume, she embraces her witchiness. This goes hand in hand with the death card and her sacrifice. Like I said, the death card is not just death, it's rebirth. Lily has achieved enlightenment and reborn into her witchy self, and that is why we don't actually see her death. We see her change. And in the last moments before she dies, she slips back in time to her first lessons. She is quite literally reborn. We open on Alice. Now notice she is laying in the same spot she died, but she's no longer in the 80s witch's trial clothes. In the afterlife, Billy's illusions are no longer in effect. This sweeping shot makes it appear like she's upside down, visually symbolizing how she has moved from life into death. It's also reminiscent of the phrase, as above, so below. The phrase was popular with occultists in the early 1900s to explain cosmic balance. Life and death are their own sort of cosmic balance. Things die so others can live, like we see when plant life sprouts from Agatha's body. Now our intern Elias pointed out that Rio is serving as a guide for the newly dead, much like Charon from Greek mythology. Now Charon is the ferryman for the river Styx, leading the dead into the underworld, and this is particularly fitting because Rio Vidal literally means river of life. Alice says,
That's all the time I get?
Which is a direct reference to Sandman.
So there is, little one. That's all you get.
Rio says,
You died protecting someone.
And one thing we find really interesting here is that Alice actually finished Agatha's trial. Jack Schaefer told The Wrap that the stated goal is to punish Agatha. She is put in a situation where she kills one of her own coven members and then has to look in the faces of her coven. And that's when the door opens, because she is punished. In that case, Alice served her cosmic and witchy purpose. So then we cut to the title, Follow Me My Friend to Glory at the End. Like every other episode, this is a line from the Ballad of the Witch's Road, and it's specifically the last line since it's the last time that they are on the road. We cut to Jen pounding on the door, and notice there's all these spikes because the door emerged out of an Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden? Excellent!
And then we see Agatha.
Yeah, but why was she so scared, person?
Well, because at the end of the last episode, Lilia said,
When she calls you a coward, hit the deck.
Now since Lilia took the Salem 7 out with her, Agatha knows that the only person who could try to attack her is Rio. We see Rio, and awesome costuming detail. There's actually a little red woven into her top, probably to represent blood from lives lost. Also, another costuming note, in the light, we can see that her crown has similar design elements to both Billy and the Scarlet Witch, including including the points and intricate framework. Now this is a hint to the true power of Billy and Wanda. Their costume designs literally mimic the inevitability of death. Rio says,
"He is an abomination,"
which is similar to things people said about Agatha for her entire life.
You were born evil.
Then Rio says,
"Why do you let them believe those things about you?"
We cut back to Jen and Billy. Jen says,
Green Witch with a capital G. She told us who she was in the very beginning.
A reference to Rio's introduction in episode 4.
Less a green witch, more
The Green Witch.
Jen also says,
Greencraft is about the cycle of all living things, growth and decay in constant flow.
Which is why Rio holds a knife in one hand and a flower in the other. She literally displays death becoming a new life. It's revealed that death can't take Billy.
You can't. If Billy is killed, he'll reincarnate again and then you'll lose him.
And I want to highlight how strong that makes both Wanda and Billy. They literally defy the forces of death. When Rio leaves, she cuts through the backdrop like it's a theatrical backdrop from an old movie, maybe even like The Wizard of Oz. Now, of course, this is another reference to that beloved classic, but it also hints how this entire world isn't real. Remember in WandaVision when Agatha revealed herself behind the scenes, so to speak? This is the same thing. Rio is showing that it's fake, just like a movie. When Billy and Jennifer catch up with Agatha, she goes into her over-dramatic witch voice, complete with a cackle.
I left until the big score.
And Kathryn Hahn's done such a good job this entire season of showing when Agatha's being genuine and when she's lying. When she's being genuine, her acting is very grounded.
You don't have to know a person's name to know who they are.
But when she's lying or scheming, she gets over the top and dramatic.
That's my coven you're talking about. I'm not that kind of witch anymore.
Why is that?
Well, because her theatrics are a defense mechanism. She says to Rio that she lets everyone believe terrible things about her because
the truth is too awful.
Being stereotypically evil protects her from her real shame. Now notice when Agatha trips over the shoes, she actually yells at Billy.
Then how exactly do we get off?
Because she knows that this is all from his head. There's no magical road to blame for the design. It's just Billy. And honestly, it's a little funny in retrospect.
Maybe if you don't know, then keep quiet!
Also, over on our Discord, Morse pointed out that Billy is actually responsible for sending them to the beginning. He says,
Earth magic with no green witch. We're back to square one.
And then bam, next thing you know, the road is a circle and they are literally at the start. The circular nature of the road also represents the never-ending cycle of life and death. Agatha says,
What are you gonna do? Have them bronzed?
Which is a reference to the bronze baby shoes that we see in his room later in the episode. Now when Baby puts his shoes back on, they're literally transferred home. Kind of.
Where are we?
My basement, give or take.
And this is probably a reference to Dorothy's shoes in The Wizard of Oz. Agatha also references this here.
There's no place like home.
And this is probably also a reference to Dorothy needing to use the ruby slippers to get home in The Wizard of Oz.
And think to yourself, there's no place like home.
So this entire room is set up like a morgue, which is a callback to the first episode. As Jen struggles to get out of the bag, Agatha says,
Let me out! Don't steal her struggle.
Now not only is it funny, but it's actually a very common parenting refrain. They're really solidifying the mother-son relationship between Agatha and Billy. Jen says,
I couldn't save Lilia. I didn't even try to save Alice. I'll be damned if I let you two idiots die.
So last week we talked about how Lilia truly did act as Glinda the Good and gave everybody something they were missing. And as for Jen, that was a heart. She went from not caring about anyone to genuinely wanting to save her coven members. And then we find out that Agatha was the one who bound Jen. So way back in episode 4, Jen said,
I still don't know how he did it. Bound me without magic.
And when she said that, Agatha was watching over Billy, and that's why she didn't know until this exact moment. Now, there's two reasons I think Agatha genuinely did not know that she was responsible. One, she reacts like she really is hearing this for the first time. Two, she says in episode 3,
I have always hated you, but I left you alone. Because what you were doing was important.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, Kathryn Hahn's done a great job differentiating between her dramatic lying side and her subtle, truthful side. In episode 3, she says it like she's being honest. This entire show is about overcoming trauma. So for most of the witches, their trauma was resolved in their trials, but not Jen because she still doesn't know who actually bound her. So this unbinding spell isn't just to get her power back, it's to finally confront and let go of her trauma. That's why she gets so emotional. It's catharsis. It's also why Agatha's snarky demeanor fades. She is face to face with the long-term pain that she has caused. She's killed tons of witches, but she truly ruined Jennifer's life for a century. The long-term suffering she played a part in is genuinely shameful to her. And then, for the first time, we see Jennifer's pink magic. That explains her wardrobe so well. This entire time, she's worn a bright pink dress with literal rose quartz sewn in. She was trying to reconnect with the magic that she lost. And I should note that Saoirse Zameda even wore pink at the D23 performance of The Witch's Road. Jen disappears, and then Agatha tries to get Billy's power. So, another cool hex detail. Every time Billy gets angry, the grow lights count down by 2 lights instead of 1. Because he's emotional, he is literally unfairly rushing Agatha's trial time. Agatha says,
"Give him another life, another spin around the dance floor."
Which is actually a reference to the actual William Kaplan. One of the last things he did was dance at his bar mitzvah. Billy says,
"Do you think I can bring Tommy back?"
Yeah, how was she so sure that she could bring him back?
Well, for one, he did it himself. Secondly, he created his own hex, which means that he is as strong as Wanda. Wanda brought her kids into life with pure magic.
That's what every mother does.
If they have the same power set, then Billy can definitely find him a body. Also, notice how Agatha responds here.
"I know how I did it."
You never do.
Now this is a direct reference to Wanda and how she didn't know how she created the hex in WandaVision.
I need you to tell me how you did this.
I didn't do anything.
I also love that Agatha sits down in a classic meditation pose and urges Billy to connect with his breath. In modern witchcraft, meditation is very important because it allows people to connect with their higher selves. And this isn't the first time we've seen some type of meditation connected with magic. Doctor Strange also does a version of meditation to divine the options against Thanos, and Wanda meditates to find her children in the multiverse. When Billy starts to remember, there's direct lines from WandaVision.
Boys, thanks for choosing me to be your mom.
Now as it stops, there's also glitching sounds.
It's your mother folding her world. That's okay.
To mimic the television and static effect of her illusion. Also, I want to point out this line. So Billy didn't actually hear that in the original show, unless he was telepathically eavesdropping. He was upstairs in his room while his parents were downstairs. So I think this line will be very important as it focuses on reunion. Now, of course, it could just be an allusion to Billy and Tommy reuniting, but it could also be about the Maximoffs coming back together as a family. Remember, the show Vision Quest is in the works, and we do not know for sure that Wanda is dead. They could all definitely reunite in a later show, or maybe even in Avengers Doomsday. Notice how Agatha says,
"You can't keep him. So where does he go?"
I don't know!
Now, in my opinion, that implies that Billy was protecting Tommy's soul. That's why he could feel him this whole time, even if he couldn't reach him. Remember, Tommy doesn't have any mind or magic abilities. He takes after his uncle. So, if it wasn't for Billy, his soul would have simply died. As Tommy is traveling, we see these red flashes. Now, this is probably remnants of the hex. Notice these structures are actually hexagons connecting.
No, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
And when they're in the water, the pieces of the hex are floating, completely disintegrated. He has literally seen the world through Tommy's eyes. Billy says about Tommy's new body,
"The people, the family, there's no one to love him. He's got no one."
Now in the comics, unlike William, Tommy's had a pretty rough life. His parents are divorced and disinterested, and he spends most of his childhood in juvie. In fact, when they find him, he is literally in prison. Also, notice that Tommy's new body is wearing green and white sneakers, just like Speed's costume design from the comics, which was based on Quicksilver's original green and white costume. So this isn't simply about getting Tommy back. Just like all the other witches and his own mother in the penultimate episode of her show, Billy had to work through his trauma. Surprise, surprise, dying was very traumatic for him. In fact, it was so traumatic that Billy simply repressed it so he wouldn't have to deal with it, just like Wanda repressed Vision's death in the early episodes of WandaVision. It was only after he faced his trauma and forced himself to remember that he could move on, aka get off the road. Now, as this is going on, we have to remember that Billy is the actual creator of this hex. The ground only splits open when he leaves, aka he only gives Agatha an actual fair trial once she helps him. And then we finally get the answer to whose hair is in the locket. Nicholas Scratch. Her trauma and grief never centered around her ex-girlfriend. Instead, it centered around the son that she lost. And she actually uses her tears to give life into the dandelion seed. Now, this isn't just for convenience. She's able to create something new out of her trauma. In many ways, the dandelion symbolizes Agatha and Billy's relationship. Agatha only ever took a liking to him because he reminded her of Nicholas. She grew a brand new maternal relationship out of the wreckage of her old trauma. It also symbolizes the entire circle of green witchcraft. witchcraft. Agatha is crying because of the death of her son. She used that to grow new life. It's literally life and death as an ebb and flow. Also, by the time she starts growing, there are only 3 lights left. Now, 3 is a recurring motif in the show. There's the maiden, mother, and crone symbolism, 3 figures. Agatha is also the 3 of swords, and when Billy looks her up in episode 6, there's 333 results. Now, in numerology, 333 is the number of creativity and the eagerness for life. So it is fitting that her final trial is literally creating new life. Now, when Agatha escapes the trial, she emerges from the cellar door. If you'll remember, in The Wizard of Oz, Auntie Em and Dorothy's family escaped the tornado by going into a cellar door. So the fact that Agatha is leaving the cellar and coming into a storm is a reverse of The Wizard of Oz. Because as we see, Rio's power is so strong, it nearly forms a tornado. Rio says,
"You're coming with me."
And this whole aspect of their relationship is very interesting. Rio isn't trying to kill Agatha because she hates her, she's trying to claim her forever. That's why, in the first episode, she's so flirty as she tries to kill her. She's trying to win her back, admittedly in a very toxic way. Now, she is genuinely angry at Agatha for refusing her love, as shown here.
Death by 1,000 cuts!
And I have no idea if this was intentional, but this actually isn't the first time we've seen this exact punishment in a relationship in Marvel. In Jessica Jones, Pam tries to kill her wife, Jerry, by repeatedly cutting her after she's ordered to by Kilgrave.
You want death by 1,000 cuts? Do it.
Also, I love this zoom out to all of the characters from WandaVision. The first thing they ask is it happening again? Clearly talking about a second hex. And this is ironic because a second hex was already formed right beneath them and they never knew it. And I just want to add, it is crazy that they still live there. I am surprised that Westview is not a literal ghost town. When Agatha looks up at the moon, she says, "Fire phase." And it's no surprise that this is the same phase of the moon that we saw in Alice's trial. The fire phase reminds Agatha of the protection circle that Alice drew to stop the curse. And this actually has dual symbolism. For one, Alice was a protection witch. Even in death, her memory nearly protects Agatha. Secondly, Agatha is a covenless witch, but she actually learned from her coven. Whether or not Agatha wants to admit it, there was a sharing of ideas and actual sisterhood. Now, of course, the protection circle doesn't work because death can't really be evil, it's just a natural part of life. And this is very integral in Rio and Agatha's relationship. Now, I love how Rio literally throws a sink at her. There's a common saying, everything and the kitchen sink, which literally means you hit somebody with everything you have. So throwing the sink at Agatha is really funny, but it also shows just how hard Rio is trying to kill her. Also, notice that Agatha tries to use the same incantation that Jen used on Billy. Once again, she's actually learned from her coven, whether she likes it or not. And then we get some great Evil Dead references. There's actually so many layers to this. Now, in Evil Dead, the main characters listen to a recording from the Necronomicon, aka the Book of the Dead. This unlocks a demonic entity that then uses nature to possess its first victim. So this is shot for shot what's happening here. Rio is literal death, the same entity unlocked in the Evil Dead, and she uses vines in the exact same way. Also, in Evil Dead, this entity has a less savory element. And when Rio walks over to Agatha, she says,
"Why don't you want me?"
Agatha doesn't want her, but she is forcing herself upon her. So then sparks start to flare, literally, and I love this as an entrance cue for Billy. Also, this is a reversal of the scene between Wanda and Agatha in WandaVision. When Wanda descends from the sky as the Scarlet Witch, it's to defeat and trap Agatha. Now, Wanda's son is saving her in the exact same way. And instead of Wanda stealing Agatha's power, Billy is giving Agatha his power.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Also, the lightning effect is because she is taking Billy's power. When she took Wanda's power, it's the typical nebulous strands that we see in other witches. And then Agatha returns to her traditional costume that we saw in WandaVision. But notice her fingers are no longer black because she doesn't have the Darkhold anymore. This could explain her change in demeanor from WandaVision to now. And let's be clear, I am not saying that she is a saint in this show. She's still pretty evil, but she was very willing to kill kids in WandaVision, which she obviously is not cool with now. Even though she's not morally great in this show, the Darkhold still corrupted her from somebody who used cruelty and dramatics as a defense mechanism to becoming a truly remorseless individual. And without the taint of the Darkhold, we can actually see her nails. Now, we've actually seen her hands in the credits this entire season. They're even overlaid with the sheet music for the Ballad of the Witch's Road, which is so fitting since we discover the ballad was never real at the end of this episode. But this goes hand in hand with this other nice detail from the credits. This here, that's your mom. Also, notice that she is able to stop the connection with Billy, which means that she did purposefully kill Alice during the trial. Then we get another Rio costume change. stylish. Now, as opposed to her comparatively understated look, she is now in full queen attire. And notice the chest plate has vines that symbolize her connection with nature. Rio throws Billy through a greenhouse, and funny detail, she still has a ton of herbs and potions from when she was a practicing witch during WandaVision. When Rio stands up, her crown actually looks like horns. So, in the Wicca religion, there is a deity known as the Horned God, who is associated with nature and rebirth, and it's even been said that he carries souls into the underworld. But more importantly, the Horned God is the counterpart to the triple goddess of the moon, also known as the Mother, the Maiden, and the Crone. Now, of course, the triple goddess is represented by Agatha, since she's always wearing the pendant. And so yes, Agatha and Rio are literally perfect matches for each other. Also, in some Wiccan beliefs, the Horned God dies on Samhain, otherwise known as Halloween. You know, the day the finale premiered on. God, the writing in this show is so good. Agatha offers Billy up.
Take him! What? You heard him!
And I never thought this would stick.
But why? She's evil.
Because of yet another cool costuming detail. When they're standing together, it's very clear that Agatha's cloak is blue, which was not the original cloak from WandaVision. In WandaVision, her cloak is purple, symbolizing her selfishness and self-concern.
Oh yeah, I missed all that because I'm colorblind.
Right? So a cloak is a protective garment used against the wind and rain. In the past, she was only ever concerned about protecting herself, therefore the purple. But when she creates the cloak in this series, she is emotionally affected by Billy, and of course, his magic is blue. The change in cloak color represents that she is no longer just concerned for herself, she's also concerned with protecting him. Notice that when Billy telepathically speaks to Agatha, he causes the street lamps to flicker. And when Billy mentions Nikki, Agatha touches where she usually wears her pendant, the one piece of him that she still carries around.
How did he know his name is Nikki?
Well, all the way back in episode 1, there is a drawing with the name Nikki on top. Then Agatha and Rio finally kiss. Now, the reason Agatha immediately starts dying isn't because Rio is killing her, it's because she is taking her powers. In episode 1, Rio taunts her about stealing her power, and she said,
"It's cute, but you know that would kill me."
We should also note that the kiss of death is also a term for a really toxic relationship, and clearly Agatha and Rio's relationship is not healthy. It's also very powerful that Agatha rises just to fall. Within this fight, she already channeled Jen and Alice, and here she channels Lilia. She sacrifices herself to save someone else. And so, of course, her death fall is framed the exact way as Lilia's death in episode 7. After her death, she immediately shrivels and rots, just like all the witches that she has killed. And then she joins the Earth. Now, we're of two minds about this. On one hand, this could be Rio's way of burying her. We actually see a tear in Rio's eyes as she stands over her, and this could definitely be a final nice gesture. That would also explain why so much of the plant growth is purple. It was Rio's version of putting a bouquet on a graveyard, and in her death tarot card, she is even holding a purple flower. On the other hand, she could have rotted so fast because she stole so much power over the years. Maybe when she died, all of the power that kept her alive for so long fled her body and she decayed rapidly. It's also very symbolic that mushrooms sprout from her body. Mushrooms are weird little plants and honestly kind of creepy if you know a lot about them. Basically, mushrooms need a lot of decay to grow. You can't plant a mushroom per se. It can grow by repurposing dead materials. That's why they're pretty common on rotting trees. Now, the mushrooms that grow out of Agatha obviously symbolize the circular nature of life and death. Agatha gets a second life as an entirely new entity, similar to how mushrooms use decay to grow new life. Billy picks up the Mother, Maiden, Crone pin, symbolizing the completion and rebirth of the cycle. Agatha began the series in the Mother position and then moved on to the Crone position when she died. So now Billy takes on the mantle in the beginning stage as the Maiden. As he walks out, he pulls up his hood, just like his mother did at the end of WandaVision. When Billy gets home, he does the same steam wipe that we saw in Secret Invasion, except now it actually means something. This symbolizes how, prior to his journey, his vision was clouded, but now he can see clearly. And this clarity is why he finally recognizes that he created the Hex. It truly was Billy all along. In our episode 6 breakdown, we pointed out how much of Billy's decor ended up in the trial, and they make that very clear here.
It's exactly how I pictured it.
Now, some of these we've already caught in past videos, but there's also these tiny knickknacks that we couldn't really see before, like this little toy fire here on the shelf that looks like the chaos energy of the Scarlet Witch. There's also the hourglass, like in this trial, but also like the witch's hourglass in The Wizard of Oz. Billy even has a photo of the moon, foreshadowing the moon phases we see in every trial. And of course, this Poltergeist 2 poster on the wall foreshadows the ghost that Billy sees at the very end of the episode. Also, shout out to friend of the channel Dodd Sides for pointing pointing this out. The focus on the Wizard of Oz poster is very important because, just like Dorothy at the end of that film, Billy is waking up from a sort of dream. He's created this magical world, but it was only ever in his head.
Wait a minute, you're telling me that Dorothy didn't really go to Oz? Yes, she did.
Dude, no, that's why she wakes up at the end. She sees that all the guys from her dream were the guys around the farm.
No, that's not true, because then why does she keep returning to Oz, and why are there so many books about Oz that don't even involve Dorothy? And see, that's because it's a real place that Dorothy went to, and I do not accept your interpretation of this story's events.
Okay, fine. So also in the background, Billy has a Moon Tarot tapestry. So the Moon Tarot card represents your subconscious anxiety and fear. In a reading, it's drawn in the upright position when the querent is projecting those fears onto other people or the real world, which of course is exactly what Billy is doing. Agatha All Along creator Jack Schaefer even said in an interview that each trial is supposed to tap into an instinctual fear. So Billy literally shaped the trials in the image of his worst nightmares. This also explains why the moon imagery showed up so much on the road. So the title of the episode, Mother, Maiden, Crone, is the last line of the first chorus in the Ballad of the Witch's Road. The reason it's the title for the last episode is because it was the last line that Agatha sang at Nicholas's grave. And every episode this season has taken its title from that song, which, in hindsight, was a very subtle hint that, like always, it's been Agatha all along. But the phrase Mother, Maiden, Crone has a deeper significance. Now, as we pointed out in our WandaVision videos, these are the three aspects of the goddess, representing three stages of womanhood.
This is also why witches often appear in threes in great literature, such as Macbeth and Hocus Pocus.
Right, and specifically in this episode, Agatha begins as a maiden, becomes a mother, and then ends the episode as a gray-haired ghost, the Crone. So the episode begins in 1750, 57 years after Agatha killed her coven and began her rampage of witch murdering. Now, because Agatha absorbed the energy of other witches, this means that she was able to avoid death. So I'm guessing that Rio saw Agatha as a companion to her because she was one of the few mortals that would not be afraid of death. Maybe Jen's even right.
How did they even meet? Over corpses, I imagine.
And Agatha calls her,
"Please, my love!"
which is similar to Thanos in the comics. Thanos was a worshipper and an unrequited lover of Mistress Death, and that's the reason why he snapped away half the universe in the Infinity Gauntlet comic book. Not for nothing, there's also a limited series where his love of death becomes literal, and it's gross. We open on Agatha literally running from death as she's about to give birth. Now, this show deals with themes of womanhood, specifically how women who don't fit into a narrow view of what's acceptable are punished. Now, as a society, we intrinsically connect birth and womanhood, but even as a mother, Agatha doesn't fit into the societal roles because she is a single mother. Like, quite literally, there is no father in the picture. After giving birth, she says,
"You are made from scratch."
Which of course is where he gets his last name, Scratch. But as Catherine Hahn confirmed in an interview with Creative Company, Agatha and Rio's love,
they didn't need men. So of course men were like, hell, like their babies are born, there's no men.
And this might be why he was sentenced to die. He's literally the son of death. And this is also implied in their fight in episode 8. Rio says,
"This walk with another woman's son on a road that doesn't..."
Stop! Which referred to the fact that, by allowing him to live, Agatha actually kept Nick from her other mom. Now, I should note two other things here. One, Nicholas's magical creation creates a parallel with Wanda, who of course created her two sons with magic. And two, the devil is often referred to as Old Scratch or the Nick. Now, I bring this up because we noticed a lot of devil imagery associated with her son. They are followed around by a goat, an animal often associated with Old Scratch himself. And as our intern Elias pointed out, the Devil Tarot card features a goat as well as a man and woman linked by chains. Now, the meaning of the card is to feel trapped by circumstances of your own design. Now, these two people represent Adam and Eve, but in this case, it could also represent Agatha and Nick, being tethered to one another as they perform the devil's work, killing witches. The goat, or the devil, literally looms over Agatha and Nicholas as Agatha becomes more and more addicted to stealing witches' power. She is also trapped between short-term pleasure, being with her son, and long-term pain, knowing that she's going to live centuries without her boy. All of this is symbolized by the meaning of the original Devil Tarot card. So when she and baby Nicholas encounter a coven in the woods, they are singing Greensleeves.
Oh, I know. You're not feeling well. Oh, shh.
So this ballad dates back to the 1500s, and it's thought to be written by Henry VIII. The lyrics they sing here are, "Alas, my love, you do me wrong, to cast me off discourteously, for I have loved you well and long, delighting in your company."
Yeah, geez, that is a very Henry VIII kind of song.
It really is, and the song has a deeper meaning at this very moment. So the lyrics, "Alas, my love, you do me wrong, to cast me off discourteously," shows how Agatha was spurned by her coven, and now in return she will spurn all the covens that she meets over the centuries. So this circle around the coven is called boundary stones. Now boundary stones are an ancient form of magic that divides regular land from private magical sacred spaces, which allows for witches and occultists to perform spells and other magic safely within their grounds. And if you look closely, they even glow yellow when she steps over them. So I'm wondering if maybe these stones even had runes carved into them. And the Latin the witch speaks translates to, "We welcome into the circle." By allowing Agatha to pass through the stones, they allow her into the coven. And this is why one witch screams, "Who let you in?" as they die. Now, as they leave, Agatha says,
I think we're going to be very good at this.
So this implies this is a new behavior for Agatha, and I have some theories on why she started right after having a child, but we'll get to that in a bit. So then she starts to use Nicholas as part of her long con to steal witches' powers, and when he asks why they can't just join a coven, she replies,
"Because then they will try to kill us."
So this is showing us that Agatha is still reeling from her past trauma when her own mother's coven tried to kill her in Salem. And then she also says,
"If you want to survive, get used to this feeling."
Which is very similar to what Jennifer and the others told Billy.
You wanted her power. That's what this has always been about for you, isn't it?
Of course it is. That's what all of this is about, for any of us.
The implication here being that in order for a witch to survive, she must seek out power at any cost. But as this show demonstrates, a witch needs her coven, and inadvertently, Agatha admits this in the next scene. But first, we learn that Nicholas was actually the author of the Witch's Road melody.
Walk, walk, walk the road, I walk the windy road.
Now, overall, the lyrics do change over the years, but it's important that Nick's version is very sweet and simple, like a nursery rhyme. This shows how the nursery rhyme, and in a way Agatha, started off with pure intentions. And we actually got a hint that Nicholas wrote the song all the way back in episode 1. The first time we see his name is actually on a choir trophy. And this also makes this argument from episode 4 all the more funny and so much sadder.
The ballad clearly says, "With coven true, glory shall be thine."
No, it doesn't. It's coven 2.
You just know Agatha was resisting the urge to say, "I wrote the damn song." But also, she says the line is,
"Burn and brew with coven 2, and glory shall be thine."
And that's because the song was originally just about them, her and her son. And damn, this reveal was amazing, that the Witch's Road was actually a long con invented by Agatha and her son to steal the power of witches. Now we're going to dive into the clues and meaning in just a bit, but first, think about what this means thematically. The loss of Agatha's son really cemented her detachment from everyone. From this point on, she can only ever use her son's song, her grief, as a way of disconnecting from others, because she refuses to face her trauma. She even says this later on.
Because I can't face him!
Then she outlines the limits of her power. Now first, she says what she is able to do, but notice how these are also all abilities that other witches in her life possess.
I can cast illusions, I can control a feeble mind, I can move objects using my will.
I also like that she says that she can control a feeble mind, like Ralph Boner.
Boner.
But then she outlines what she cannot do, and notice these are the abilities of her future coven.
But I cannot heal you, I cannot protect you from what's coming, and I cannot divine when she will return.
So even at the height of her witch killing spree, Agatha is basically admitting that she does need the abilities of a coven to protect her son. Also, notice that he calls it,
"Use your purple."
And that's actually how she refers to her magic with Rio in episode 1.
Let me get my purple back.
And then we get this sweet montage of the two of them riding the Witch's Road. And it's this slow paced, just moving little sequence. And I just want to point out that, like this.
Down, down the road, down the windy road.
Exists in the same universe as this. And this.
This is my son, Scar.
In the montage, he blows this dandelion. So there's a lot to unpack here. So think about dandelions for a second. They sprout up, they're beautiful, but their lives are very short-lived, like the life of Nicholas. Then they quickly just become seeds that regrow easily. It is the cycle of life and death in just a few days. Now this was all foreshadowed by the seed that Agatha finds in her locket during the death trial. So now let's talk about the twist that Agatha and Nicholas not only wrote the Ballad of the Witch's Road, but they also made the whole thing up. Now on our Discord, you guys have guessed a lot of twists on this show. One ScreenCrush fan, Apoorv, even guessed that Billy created the road. But anyways, no one on our Discord guessed that Agatha and Nicholas made up the road. And thematically, this is a perfect choice. The road is designed to be a temptation, to offer witches whatever it is that they desire the most. For Jen, it was to break her binding. For Alice, it was to lift a curse. For Lilia, it was to basically lose her power. But Agatha related to Billy because their desires are the same. They both claim to want power, but what they actually wanted was to be reunited with the people they love. And this is fitting because the road is a symbol of the love that Agatha and her son share together. When Rio appears to him in his sleep, she is wearing her green cloak and holds a green flame. Now the name, Rio Vidal, means River of Life. And as we talked about in our last video, life and death are two sides of the same coin, and River of Life could also be a reference to the river Styx, the gateway to the underworld in Greek mythology. Now, she shows up on a day in which they don't kill any witches.
We can kill more witches tomorrow.
So earlier I mentioned that it seemed like Agatha was new to methodically killing covens, and in episode 4, Rio says,
"You get your power, and I get my buddies."
I think that Agatha began killing covens as a way to stave off Nick's death, and that's why the one day they don't kill, Rio returns. Nick leaves with Rio willingly, as if he knows her.
But why?
Well, I think it's because he already knows Rio because she is his other mother. So think about all of this in modern day, when these witches believe these horrible rumors about Nicholas.
Did you know she traded her own child for the Book of the Damned?
When Rio asked her why she let the witches say those things, Agatha said,
"Because the truth is too awful."
And that entire fight makes a lot more sense in retrospect. I already talked about how by keeping Nick alive, Agatha kept Rio from her son. And in that fight, Agatha also says,
"You gave me nothing. You took."
And that's very fitting if Agatha had to kill to keep her son alive. Rio didn't just take their son, eventually she took Agatha's humanity by forcing her into continuous murder. I also think this gesture is so important. Agatha hates Rio for taking her son, but Rio says,
"No one in history has had special treatment like you."
Rio simply is doing her job, and she isn't happy about taking Nicholas. Even as she does something that she knows will damn her and Agatha's relationship forever, she takes him sweetly. Also, notice that she prevented him from seeing his own body. When Alice dies, she is forced to confront her death, but Rio takes Nikki peacefully. Honestly, I doubt he even knew what happened. When she awakens, notice the camera is laid sideways to show how her entire world is about to be turned over on its side. And her pleas here are just heartbreaking. It reminds me of when another MCU character faced imminent mortality too young.
"I don't want to go. I don't want to go, sir, please."
And then Agatha gives us some liner notes on the song that are just heartbreaking.
"I bury my own heart here with you, my child."
So she buried her heart with Nicholas and became a cold and mean person, just like how she buried Mrs. Hart in episode 4. And I think this moment is when she truly started murdering witches for power. Again, I think she originally murdered to save Nicholas, but now that he's gone, it is purely for personal gain. She puts lavender on his grave. Now symbolically, lavender stands for love and tranquility, and in witchcraft, it's used to create spells for calmness and sleep. It's Agatha's witchy way of sending her son into the afterlife peacefully. After she says goodbye, she sings their song one more time, albeit with the saddest lyrics of all.
"Our mother loves you so."
And I want to highlight how this song was always a protection song of sorts. Originally, Agatha used the song to attract and kill other witches, which granted Nicholas with a longer life. And then she sang the song as a way to send him into the afterworld. And let's not forget that the most popular version of the song, Lorna Woo's version, was actually a protection song for Alice. And then she sang the song as a way to send him into the afterworld. And let's not forget that the most popular version of the song, Lorna Woo's version, was actually a protection song for Alice. Now, it's not surprising that the Witches' Road Con began after Nicholas's death. For one, the title hints at it. The road was never real, it was just Agatha all along. But secondly, the metaphorical road was Agatha's descent into anger and selfishness. Again, I'm not saying she was ever a great person, but she did genuinely care about her son. Without him, she has no strong ties to her own morality. And so, of course, she begins killing witches purely for personal gain. Now, as we go through the witches montage, we see Agatha at points in history that were already alluded to. For example, here she's wearing the same hat and dress that she wore when she survived the Titanic. This outfit is from the 1920s, the same period where she bound Jennifer. This also brings Agatha's journey full circle. We started the season with Agatha completely out of control, trying to claw her way out of someone else's illusion and flipping through costumes. Now we see her at a time when she had complete control and the different costumes represent her long lifespan. So when she sees the door, I think that this is the first time that she realized that Billy was a Maximoff.
But doesn't she think later on it could be her son?
I think she hopes it was, but deep down she knew it wasn't true. You see, in this episode, it's revealed that Nicholas didn't have magical abilities, or at least wasn't displaying them when he was 6 years old. I think that, at one point, she deluded herself into thinking that it was her kid, but honestly, the moment she realized it was another hex, she knew he was a Maximoff.
You're so much like your mother.
I also love this little fourth wall break when she's looking directly at the camera. It almost makes me wonder if she helped Billy realize that he created the hex while she was in ghost form, especially since we get the ghost reveal right after. I love this version of Agatha. This is the most comic accurate costuming by far. Now in the comics, she's very old, or she was until they made her look like this, but we're ignoring that for now. The point is that in her first appearance, she looks like an actual grandma, and they replicated that in her ghost design. Now, they do incorporate some elements of her new design into this costume as well. For example, the purple and silver is her color scheme currently in the comics. Also, it's not surprising that she returned as a ghost. For one, she spends a lot of time as a ghost in the comics. In fact, in the great 2016 Scarlet Witch run that lightly inspired this show, she is a ghost the entire time. But this isn't just comic accurate. She did it to spite Rio. Remember, in episode 5, Rio says,
I hate ghosts.
Even in death, she can't let Rio win. Agatha says,
I took a calculated risk.
Now, way earlier in the season, Agatha says that she can't take Rio's powers because
you know that would kill me.
So, what she's implying here is that she took a gamble with taking Rio's power. She knew it would probably kill her, but she decided to try it out anyways. But let's be real, she just can't admit that she sacrificed herself for Billy. Then Agatha says,
the song doesn't mean anything. It never did.
But that's not quite true. The song did mean something. It just wasn't a doorway to another dimension. But the song represented motherly love and familial love.
Hi.
Oh my god, are you ever just gonna stop appearing?
Probably not. I came to talk about Billy's room because there are so many clues that he created the hex. First of all, these triangle lights appear in the 80s theme trial, and this poltergeist poster is a reference to Evan Nora appearing as a ghost on the stairs, which is very similar to this scene. Behind Billy, there are several images of the moon. He is obsessed with the moon, and that corresponds to all of the moon imagery and moon phases we saw in the trials. We also see several hourglasses, including one that we actually saw in episode 7. And speaking of time, there is a Saw poster, which probably inspired Billy to do timed trials. In Saw, each victim is given a certain amount of time to solve their puzzle, and if they fail, they die. There's also an as above, so below sticker, which is a recurring motif throughout the series. And there's a Haxton poster. Haxton is a 1922 documentary that chronicles the history of witchcraft through the ages, just like Billy moved through different ages in his trials. There's also a Billie Eilish poster from her debut album, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? Now, the title of the album is pulled from the song Bury a Friend, which could reference how Billy literally buried his friends because he accidentally killed his coven members. There's also Craft poster. That movie revolves around a coven who deals with a member becoming addicted to power, much like Agatha. And a Carrie poster, which was visually referenced heavily in the 1970s trial. Oh, and this Fleetwood Mac poster also appeared in the 70s trial. And, of course, we can't forget the myriad of Wizard of Oz references. Okay, that's all I have. I'm gonna go now, but happy late Halloween.
Creepy. Now, one cool detail she missed, though, is that Billy has a Trans Lives Matter flag, similar to the Protect Trans Kids poster in Gwen Stacy's room in Across the Spider-Verse. So then Billy realizes that he is actually responsible for the deaths on the road.
Are they ghosts, too?
Wait, why was Agatha the only one who came back as a ghost?
Because Yoda taught her special meditation techniques between trilogies.
Wait, what, really?
No, it's really simple though. She's the most powerful, and she has unfinished business on Earth. She needs to guide Billy. It's also amazing how much sweeter she is to Billy about his hex than she was to Wanda. Remember, Wanda didn't exactly kill anybody in her hex, but Agatha was vicious.
Heroes don't torture people.
Now, I'm of two minds about this. The first thought is that Agatha is no longer corrupted by the Darkhold. The Black Fingers are gone. And in our last breakdown, I touched on the fact that the Darkhold did make her a worse and more villainous person. Not saying she's great without the book, but look, I mean, she's not killing kids.
I actually did bite a kid once.
The second reason, and probably the more likely reason, is that she just has a softer spot for Billy. With Wanda, she was incredibly jealous, but with Billy, she's much more maternal. Then we cut to Jennifer fleeing the Hex, and notice this is actually very similar to the shot at the end of WandaVision. But when Wanda fled, the sun was setting, signifying the end of her old life. Jennifer is flying into the sunrise, symbolizing that she gets to start anew. Agatha says,
If you want to be a witch, get used to this feeling.
which is the same thing that she said to her own son.
If you want to survive, get used to this feeling.
Now, it's easy to assume that she's saying this just because she's evil, but I think it's more complicated than that. Powerful witches always run the risk of accidentally hurting people. I mean, think about it. Neither Billy nor Wanda meant to form hexes, and they unintentionally hurt people when they did. The power passed to Lilia caused her to live her entire life in fear of the next awful event. Lorna Wu cursed her daughter just by having her, and Agatha traumatized her child by killing witches just to keep him alive. It's sort of like the Spider-Man thing.
With great power comes great responsibility.
And it's unfortunately inevitable that people will get hurt in the process. Now we go back to Agatha's old home, and I can't believe that we missed this in the last episode, but on her grave there are azaleas, which are the flowers that she asked Rio to plant.
Why don't you plant a few azaleas on your way out?
And then we see Agatha lying across the washing machines, which looks very similar to the Rocky Horror movie poster from the promotional materials. So when Billy tries to banish Agatha, she says,
I can't face him!
Now, I've seen a lot of people say that she's talking about Nicholas, and that's possible. If so, I think that she can't face how she traumatized her own child by killing witches around him. But we have another theory. A lot of people are still wondering how Agatha got the Darkhold in the first place. Now we know as late as this flashback that she did not have the Darkhold. Look, no black fingers. So how did she get the Darkhold between then and WandaVision? In episode 3, Jen says,
Did you know she traded her own child for the Book of the Damned?
And that he might be an agent of Mephisto. Now we know from this episode that that's not true, but maybe she did trade something for the Darkhold. Her own afterlife. Maybe when she dies, not ghost dies, but like dies, she'll become a servant of Mephisto. And that would fit. It would explain how Agatha got the Darkhold, why he was referenced in this show, and, as we already know, he is going to appear in the show Ironheart. It would wrap up quite a few loose ends quite nicely. And it would mean that when Agatha says,
I can't face him!
she is not referring to Nick. She's talking about Mephisto.
Yeah, but doesn't she nod when Billy says Nicholas?
Yeah, but do you really think she's going to admit that she made a deal with Mephisto? And notice she doesn't agree when Billy says,
I'm sure he would forgive you for whatever you did.
Maybe Nick could get over the whole murdering witches to survive thing, but probably not a trade with Mephisto. Now, when she puts on the Mother Maiden Crone pendant, the symbol is erased and replaced with solid purple. This is because Agatha's actually moved out of this cycle entirely by dying. And then Billy says,
Spirit is my guide.
And this team up makes total sense. In the comics, Ghost Agatha is Wanda's guide and even helps her down the real Witch's Road. So it makes complete sense for the showrunners to copy this idea for the MCU. Also, when he said,
Coven 2.
I wanted to cry. Remember, Agatha and Jen argued about this in episode 4.
Ballad clearly says, with Coven true.
No, it doesn't. It's Coven 2.
And Agatha was right about the line because, well, you know, she wrote it. But that was the original line because it was just Agatha and Nicholas. When Billy repeats it, he's really becoming her adopted son. Billy turns the old door into a tombstone, and I want to point out that their names are in the center of a pentacle.
I thought that was a pentagram.
Pentagrams don't have a circle around the star. So in the Wicca religion, pentacles represent the 5 elements of witchcraft: air, earth, fire, water, and spirit. And each witch in the coven represents one of those elements. Pentacles are also used to banish or to invoke spirits. In this case, I think the pentacle is to stop the dead coven members from returning so they can have a peaceful afterlife. And the series ends with Agatha saying,
Let's go find Tommy.
So I think this will lead directly into Vision Quest. That series will focus on all of the twins reuniting with their new and improved robot dad. The first place to look is the costume choice for each coven member, starting with Agatha. Once freeing herself from Wanda's spell, Agatha puts her hair up in a Gibson Girl-inspired updo, which was to convey a witch who loved to be in control.
If you want to be in control, you can be.
As the show went on and Agatha spent time on the road, her hair became undone, flowing looser and wilder. By the time she regains her powers in episode 8, her hair flows out as she lets loose with Rio.
Or if that's what you kids are calling it these days.
So before she magically created her cloak, there was a cool detail in her jacket that she wore on the road. The inside of the jacket is adorned with a murder of crows.
Hey, that's pretty messed up, person. She's got dead birds in her jacket.
No, a murder of crows is just what it's called. It's like a flock of birds.
Oh. Continue.
Anyways, the top of her jacket near the neck is where the most birds are embroidered, but as you follow the design downwards, the crows morph into runes. This is fitting because not only are crows a sign of personal and spiritual growth in witchcraft, but symbolically these crows could represent all the witches that Agatha scammed after she lost her son. Just like the crows become runes, those victims became batteries that Agatha could drain. When Rio finally reveals her death outfit, there is a piece of real obsidian lodged in the center of her harness, representing the black heart that only beats for Agatha.
You don't have a heart. Yes, I do. It's black. And it beats for you.
The costume designers also wanted each outfit to focus on Rio's ribs to give her a skeletal look paired with her face makeup. Billy's costumes also have amazing detail to them. We're introduced to the teen in a blue hoodie with runes etched into the sweater, which could have been foreshadowing. But we also know that William Kaplan was really into magic, so he could have just done that for fun. After Billy is wounded in episode 4, though, his outfits get progressively more red, like his blood stain, and his blue eventually becomes his red superhero cape. And that Wiccan design, I mean, that was a moment. I was screaming at the screen. So, speaking of his cape, the outside of it features patterning from WandaVision, while the inside is the same as Vision's cape. It's almost like Billy is representing both of his parents. And those same WandaVision runes are seen on his torso, and his pants are starry, just like his comic book look. Now, the other witches in the main coven have little details in their early costumes that almost spoil the show. Like Lilia's jacket is decorated with red towers that call back to when she was a kid taking lessons with her maestra, and of course, this.
The tower. Upright.
Jen's earrings look eerily similar to her comic book headband. With how she leaves Westview at the end of the show, maybe we'll see her again in her full witch gear, possibly with the Midnight Suns. And the design of her necklace also represents her being bound. The chains trap a pink rose quartz in the centerpiece, the same color as her powers will be at the end of the show. Now, my favorite costume detail, though, has to go to Alice. She wears this necklace that looks like claws are clinging to the back of her neck, just like we'll see the demon perch on her shoulders in episode 4. That and the burning house in the back of her jacket really sells us on how weighed down she feels from this curse. Only when she releases the curse is she able to fulfill her duty as a protection witch and then save Agatha at the cost of her life. But when death comes for her, the necklace and her heavy jacket are gone from her physical body, letting the audience know that in her final moments, she lived freely. Another great aspect of the show was the music. Now, I know many of us have heard the Ballad of the Witch's Road on repeat these past few weeks. Now, when our coven sings the ballad for the first time, the bell that Agatha starts the song with is the same bell we see her son steal in episode 9, which is just painfully sad that she has kept it this long. Speaking of sad, Alice is crying during the song because it reminds her of her mother, and on the opposite side of the spectrum, Sharon is singing along, similar to how she sings along with Vision in episode 1 of WandaVision.
Old MacDonald had a farm.
E-I-E-I-O.
When Rio blasts open Agatha's door, we hear Rio's theme for the first time. So the loud leitmotif sound is very similar to Oh Death by Jen Titus. Not only that, but the gust of wind that blows Agatha into the wall is foreshadowing the green tornado we'll see in episode 8. Other than the ballad, the song choices made throughout the show are great. For example, Cowboys Are Frequently Secretly Fond of Each Other by Orville Peck plays on the radio when Billy and Eddie have their first kiss. The song talks about closeted cowboys and feelings that aren't fully understood. It applies to Eddie's thoughts that we can hear because of Billy, but also how Billy will feel in this flashback episode, not fully understanding who he is. Now, we pointed out the Billie Eilish poster in our episode 9 breakdown, but we forgot some key details. The album is titled When We Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? Which is funny because the last time we saw Billy's mom, she was dreamwalking to find him. And this is also the same album where we first heard this.
You should see me in a crowd.
Okay, so now we're going to get into our fan-submitted Easter eggs. A lot of these come from our Discord server, which by the way is free to join, and it's a really great community. It was so much fun discussing each episode of Agatha with you guys as each episode dropped. Links for the Discord are below, it's free, and it's a lot of fun, you should check us out. Epic Worm Dude and Jess on our Discord pointed out that the promotional material for Agatha All Along indicated what each episode was about by using different fonts. Episode 1 is typewritten out like a true crime headline, while episode 2 includes a pentagram as the first time that we see the road. Episodes 3, 4, and 5 have fonts relating to each of the trials featured in the episode. Episode 6 seems normal but has a red circle around it, possibly because the episode features the hex again, or because it's the episode where we learn Billy's backstory. Episode 7 is covered in roots, similar to where Jen and Lilia find themselves underneath the road, and episode 8 uses a futuristic font matching the final trial in Agatha's basement that looks like a morgue. Jess also predicted that Lilia would die before episode 7 release based off of this scene after the Coven first entered the road. Starting from the back of the group, Mrs. Hart died, followed by Alice, and Lilia sacrificed herself. The way this is framed, it feels like death is slowly catching up to each member in the group, both metaphorically and literally, when actual death in the form of Rio joins the Coven. Next in line after Lilia is Jennifer, but she makes it out alive, so the symbolism could have stopped at Lilia, or Jen might be meeting her doom in a future MCU project before Billy and Agatha do. Speaking of Lilia, Vesper on our Discord pointed out that the phrase, "your path winds out of time" in her tarot trial is really similar to this line in Lorna Wu's version of the Ballad of the Witch's Road. The road is wild and wicked, winding out of time. Now, a few lines later, the lyrics go, "But take a breath and dance with death. My love cannot be turned." They theorized that an act of love will save the day, but we assumed it would be romantic love towards Rio. Instead, Agatha's motherly love for her son and the part of Nicholas that she sees in Billy is what spurred her to sacrifice herself. Dylan built on our theory of what if Lilia had a hand in creating tarot in the MCU. Since she was around reading tea leaves in the 1500s, could the tarot cards be based on her future Coven members?
What do you mean by that, person?
Well, think about it. She experienced her life in fragments, so it's possible that for cards like Death and the Three of Pentacles, that she was taking inspiration from Rio and the Coven singing in Agatha's basement. A lot of the tarot cards in her deck reflect her future friends, like the Magician card looking like Billy and the Three of Swords looking like Agatha. Ryan, cool name by the way, linked episode 6 with the structure of The Wizard of Oz. Both Dorothy and William visit a fortune teller who ends up being a strong figure in the places they visit. The fortune teller becomes the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, and Lilia realizes who Billy is while dressed as Glinda the Good Witch. Cannot believe that we missed that. Chris Powers and Dev both pointed out when Agatha calls Tommy Toby, it could be a nod to The Labyrinth, another story featuring the main character on the search for her brother.
Give me the child.
Sarah, beware. I have been generous up until now, but I can be cruel.
So, Harbinger of Chaos pointed out that when Billy searches for Agatha in episode 6, 333 results pop up, which is an angel number. But Dev and Spider-Man on our Discord pointed out that 333 could also symbolize half of 666, the devil's number.
Just so you know, with this purchase of a soul, I will also give a soul to a child in need.
Yeah, I don't want that.
This would represent how Billy and Tommy were shards of Mephisto, the literal devil in the comics. AJ Snackslord, that's a great name, drew a comparison between Billy and Wanda's different hexes. Since Wanda loves sitcoms, we saw fourth wall breaks in WandaVision conveyed by cameras that Agatha was operating. But because of Billy's love for musical theater, Rio breaks the fourth wall in episode 8 when she cuts through the background like a theater set. You can see this love of theatrics in the different aspect ratios and camera tricks for the first two trials as well. Along these same lines, in Billy's room, we see a poster for this famous episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That episode, called Once More with Feeling, is about Buffy coping with recently having been resurrected from death, just like Billy is. Now over on YouTube, Psychosis and John Byrne pointed out that Agatha's feet curl up when she dies, just like the Wicked Witch of the East. Not to mention that Dorothy finds her way home in The Wizard of Oz by clicking her heels together, just like Billy finds his way home by putting on the shoes once again. It all comes back to the shoes. Now over on our Discord, a user named Blue pointed out these Blu-rays left behind in Ralph's closet. Now we did catch that in our video, but we did not catch the guitar right next to the DVDs which Ralph played in WandaVision. Gus Teg 83 on our episode 8 breakdown said that the road is like an Ouroboros when the Coven reaches the beginning again. So this is the classic image of a snake eating its own tail that was featured a lot in Loki season 2. It's meant to represent the cycle of destruction and rebirth, similar to how Rio represented life and death through nature. But also, Billy and Agatha both undergo a rebirth by the end of the series. Aldo the Apache caught that episode 6 Reddit parody displayed a user named 4th Level Warlock, which is funny on many levels. For starters, 4th level warlocks have access to the spell Bar borrowed knowledge, which is ironic for Agatha, who steals power from other witches. It's also ironic for Billy in this episode because he has the borrowed body of William Kaplan. Not only that, but Agatha and Billy are really similar to warlocks, since they both get their powers from an outer source. In the comics though, Billy hates being called a warlock and insists that he is a witch. And finally, our intern Elias, who helped us out so much all season long, pointed out how important the Moon Tarot card is to Billy's realization in episode 8. The card features dogs howling at the moon, just like William's dog who barked at Billy in episode 6. It focuses heavily on the conscious and unconscious mind and symbolizes that your imagination is getting the best of you through illusions, fear, and anxiety. Just like how the road was a kind of illusion and Billy's realization comes with the anxiety that he has inadvertently killed his own coven members. So that was our complete breakdown of Agatha all along. Thank you all so much for watching, and let us know some other series that you would like to see a complete Easter egg breakdown of. Big shout out to Brianna McLarty, who wrote our Easter egg breakdowns. You can find her links and mine below. And let me know what you thought of the season down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Arey.